You are here for nurturing parent and child development. Of course, for any of our CalTrin returnees who have been to our protective factors, this may sound a little familiar to you. However, I promise you, Dr. Pradeep has so much more to give you. This is going to be in one of our advanced trainings for protective factors. And then let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Pradeep. On the next slide, he's a pediatrician and a community health leader, and so much more than that. That is just a quick snapshot of who he is. Past president of the AAPCA3 and a member of the board governors at the San Diego Foundation. Of course, he has expertise in child development, infant and early childhood mental health, child trauma, parents' perception of childhood behaviors, and cultural issues in healthcare. And I promise you, this slide does not encapsulate all the other things that he has expertise in. We are a big fan over here at CalTrin. And so, with that being said, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I try to keep the introduction short because, again, I think the important part is the content and all of us being together. I'm going to go, I jumped a little quickly to um, the next slide, but I'm going to go back a slide. I want you all to notice that I call this nurturing parent and child development. When I started doing this work years ago, I was really focused on teaching parents child development from the idea that parents will be able to encourage their children's development. And I still think that's incredibly important. It's actually an amazing gift to be able to teach this for so many years. And I also have noticed over the years that it's a two-way process, right? So as parents, we develop as well. Our skills change over time. And it becomes really important for us to understand that, this is just really part of the human experience. And for those of us that parent, it really forces us to grow in so many different ways. And I think the biggest piece is it really does open our hearts and allows us to love even more. So many of you out there are probably parents, but also are working with parents. And so just keeping in mind that parents are growing and they need nurturance just like children do, and they're developing as well. In fact, I think we all are developing. So with that, let me jump into one of my heroes and inspirations, Dr. Barry Brazelton. He was a pediatrician who passed away at 100 years of age not too long ago, just in the last couple of years. And he was just a wonderfully patient, kind human being. And he said, I'd love for parents to understand that if they watch a baby's behavior, they'll understand what the baby is communicating. And this is really a big change in how we saw babies. Babies were thought to be, just little lumps. But he really was one of the first people to get the whole country and the whole world to be thinking about children as dynamic from birth, even before birth. And one of the things that Dr. Brazelton taught was this idea of touch points. They're predictable periods where kids' behavior goes backwards a little bit. They maybe get a little disorganized, and that's usually a sign that they're about to have a burst in development. And as we talk about development today, you'll see it's not a linear process always, in that, well, it does progress in a certain way, but it's not the same for every child. So you really have to be attuned to each child. And again, development, you go forward, you go backwards, and you pause sometimes, right? So it's just back and forth. And, when the kids go backwards, like when your child is doing something, then they stop doing something, it can disorganize everybody, baby, family, child, toddler, everybody gets thrown off. So Dr. Brazelton was really great. He never said, do this, do that. He said, observe, learn, see how you feel. Some of these things are predictable. And he was just so wonderful and supportive. So that's my inspiration. I'd love to hear what your inspiration is. So if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, like what brought you to the training today? Who are the children in your lives? Who are the families in your lives? Who's your community? And just go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll take a peek in that as we talk. But I really want to hear and know where you all are coming from. Right now, we have over 90 people live, which is incredible and fantastic to see this level of interest. Luckily, my friends and colleagues at CalTrin do a great job of promoting these things. So, Casey, thank you for that. So as you're putting that in the chat, just like what brought you to the training today, who are the kids in your lives, and this can even be your own kids, right? and who are the families you work with. It just gives us it gives us a really good feel for who's in there. I see someone who's working with fathers, folks working with Native children, or families, mom of four. So this is great. This is kind of stuff that, oh, look at this. This is wonderful. So again, this whole piece is, I know that we're doing this as a lecture, and I have a lot to share with you all. But again, we want to try to make it as interactive as possible. So just to set the frame before we start getting into some of the details, there was a sociologist, Yuri Boffenbrenner, years ago who, in the 70s, really was the first person to really get people to think about, children come in the context of families, communities, and their societies. And all of those things are interrelated to the well-being of children. And so again, there's this great period in the 60s and 70s of people really understanding that children were so important and were just part of the whole community and the fabric, and that we needed to kind of change the way that we do things to make it more, parent and child centered. Now, we still have a long ways to go. I think we're in a period of a lot of uncertainty, and I'm hoping on the other side of this uncertainty, the things that we talk about today and the things that I've worked on my whole career become more the standard, which really say children are important. Mothers are incredibly important and do so much of this hard work of parenting. Fathers have gotten more active and involved, but mothers are still doing that, and that impacts us in the workforce. It impacts us in women's opportunities for progress in their careers. And I would love to see that we had universal childcare 0 to 8. When kids get to be 8, then they can be a little bit more independent, and there can be after school programs and things that keep them engaged, and they have a little more autonomy. But up until that point, when people say, "Are you excited about transitional kindergarten?" I say, well, yes and no, because I see this opportunity as a society to shift where we really support families in a much richer way. So again, it's important to understand the context that children and families are in. So let's go a little deeper and go into kind of what's happening inside. I just want to introduce this model to you. We'll come back to it as we're talking, because this is a framework that I use in all the talks that I give in every aspect of my work. Inside of us, right? So inside of us, we have our sensations. We know about the 5 sensations. There's actually 8, but there's the body sensations, there are emotions, and there are thoughts, right? And these are all moving around inside of us. So that circle represents our bodies, but inside our bodies, we're thinking, we're feeling, and we're sensing all the time. And the patterns that we create actually become our beliefs. Now, the interesting part is the only way that you really get a good view of your inner world is really paying attention to the words and stories. We can pay attention to our own internal words and stories, but we can also pay attention to the words and stories of others. And as we talk about child development and parent development over the course of this morning, we'll be focusing on this and some of the stories and how words and stories help me understand what's going on for a family and child. The other part is to watch actions and behaviors. One of my favorite things to teach parents is your child's behavior is language. What your child is doing, it's a language, and we need to know how to understand that. So I also mention a lot of names, and I mention a lot of resources. Again, while I am an expert, there are so many experts in this field, and there's so much great information. Any of the places that I cite are really good sources of information. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about where parents are getting their information, but where you get your information, the quality of the information is so critical. That's why I'm so happy that those of you that are here are here. I'm also really happy that people will watch this recorded, because the information I'll share with you today is just really good information. And the information is for my years and years of experience, which my years of experience are only as useful as it is to the parents who get to hear this, and all of you who get to look at this and think about this and help parents. So that's one of the big messages. The Center for the Developing Child, it's at Harvard, but you can look that up. It has tons of really great resources. And those of us in the field kind of laughingly said, well, I'm glad they finally got to this. The whole idea that if you really want to have breakthrough outcomes for children, you have to work with adults, right? So helping adults build their capacity really improves their outcomes. And again, From my perspective, I'm always trying to nurture parents because parents are the ones caring for their children 24/7. Their children live in their hearts always. And that's just the most important thing. How do we support families? Again, one of the reasons I am such a huge fan of the CalTrin trainings, all of the protective factors work, which I'll talk about briefly later, is critical. And they do such a beautiful job of teaching that. So let's talk about why I'm so focused on the word nurture. So, nurture, just the simple definition, is to care for and to encourage the growth or development of, for me, children, pets, coworkers, plants, you name it. Nurture is where we take our time and energy to care for and encourage the growth of. I think this is really important. I actually think this is one of the universal laws of being alive. Like we nurture and we get a lot of joy from that. And you'll see I'll talk about that later. But again, it occurs when parents or caregivers are available and sensitively responding to their child's needs, right? And we'll be talking about attachment and things that go with this. But again, we want parents to be available, attuned, and interested. And they can't do it all the time. We'll talk about that again later. But enough doing it enough is really um, sunshine, fertilizer, and uh, for our children, right? Like it just helps them grow, right? It's to me one of the most beautiful things that happens in the human experience. The other part is I can actually make an economic case because it builds better brains, healthy attachment, social emotional intelligence, self-regulation, resiliency, right? And resiliency happens in the context of relationships that help us regulate. And we'll be talking about that today, actually quite a bit. But you can see this mom reading to this child, pointing things out. They have attention together. You can feel how this mom holding her child, you can just feel the connection between the two of them and how their attention is both of them have it on the book. So again, these are just important pieces. And let's talk about the protective factors. The protective factors come from the Center for the Study of Social Policy and the Strengthening Families Initiative. And the thing that is really wonderful about this, these five areas, parental resiliency, their social connections, their knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete supports in times of needs, and the social emotional competence of their children are things that these two incredible researchers, two women who are incredible researchers, went through and they said, what really helps families, right? There's all these great programs out there, but what are some of the common things and common themes within all these programs that matter that we need to emphasize? And they very thoughtfully put great materials together. And again, another pitch for other Caltrin trainings is that these are the things that really have impact for families. And the part that's so exciting about this is they didn't want to create a new program. They said, look, there's all these great programs out here. Let's enhance the programs with attention to detail on these areas, right? Now, again, because I actually know these two ladies, the hard part is that they did this work and it didn't get continued funding because it wasn't their own program. So again, they're folks that I'm always looking out for as well because I just am so grateful to the work that they do. And we're going to take a deeper dive, like Casey was saying, into this whole idea of knowledge of parenting and child development. So we're going to walk through this. It's a fairly detailed slide, but this is what's really important, right? So we want parents seeking and acquiring and using accurate age and stage related information about parents' behaviors leading to secure attachment. Talk about that today. The importance of being attuned and emotionally available for one's child, being nurturing, responsive, and reliable, being regular, predictable, and consistent in routines, having interactive language experiences, providing physically and emotionally safe environments for one's child, providing opportunities for one's child to explore and learn by doing. Really, really important point. It's the whole idea of children directing the play and parents following along when they can. This next one, appropriate developmental expectations, is critical. The reason I went into this work was I think it's really exciting to see children develop and see them move through these stages. And from that excitement, that's why I wanted to teach this. As I've been teaching this, I've come to understand that when you look at the literature around child abuse, one of the most significant factors on if a child or if a parent um, is may harm their child, it's when they don't know when they're what the appropriate developmental expectations are. So I didn't realize that this work that I do is also preventing child abuse because when parents have realistic expectations, they don't get as frustrated with their children. They understand their children aren't doing it intentionally. And this is such a critical point, which gets into this point of positive discipline techniques. And again, I spent a little time on this because the word discipline is often equated to many of our experiences with discipline being punished. Discipline does not mean punishment. Discipline comes from the word disciple, which means to be taught, right? So we could say positive teaching techniques for children to be able to grow, develop, and mature, right? We really are, as parents and caregivers, teachers with a very sacred charge of caring for our little ones. The other part, and that's again a big part of what we'll be talking about today, the screening aspects, where we can recognize and attend to the special needs of children. And again, each child is so different, each child is so unique, and that becomes really important. So, with that, let's dive into child development. And what is it? Well, child development is a process that all children go through. It involves learning and mastering skills like sitting, walking, talking, skipping, tying your shoes. And children learn these skills called developmental milestones during these very predictable times. So I'm going to stop for just a second and ask you to consider how amazing it is that a baby born in China will grow up and learn Mandarin or Cantonese or another language. A baby in India will grow up in a particular region and learn Hindi, Marathi, Sindhi, something else. A child born in Spain will learn Spanish. Kids born in Latin America will grow up and learn Spanish. Kids in America, depending on their family, will grow up with whatever the dominant language in the household is. Um, but isn't that amazing? Every baby that's born, unless there's a developmental issue, will grow up and they'll learn, right? And so, as we talk about this next piece of the different domains of development, I want you to really consider that one of the most important things we can do is watch the child's innate development, right? Like they're going to do it on their own, right? You don't have to coach a baby to walk. A baby has the natural drive to learn how to walk, right? It's really amazing and fascinating. And so when we think about development, we think about it in the areas that kids develop, right? And so we think about their speech and language, how they use and understand language. And so that's important. We'll talk about that expressive and receptive language, gross motor skills, which are the big muscles, like the ones in your legs and your arms and the big muscles. And then fine motor is like our smaller muscles, like our hands and our fingers. Cognitive development is just, how do we develop our ways to think and problem solve? And the big one that I think we've really come to understand a lot more in the last 20 years is the social emotional development. It's the child's ability to interact with others, including helping themselves and self-control. Um, there's an aspect of this called self-regulation, which we will talk about quite a bit. And what's important about that is our ability to regulate ourselves is the most important predictor of our success throughout our lives, right? So this is really, really critical. All right. I'm going to just take a moment to do something that I should have done at the beginning, and I apologize for not doing this. This is a 3-hour talk, and we will take a break halfway through. So again, for those of you that are thinking, wow, this guy keeps talking, and when is he going to stop? We'll take a break about 10:30. We'll see how we're doing. The other part, as Casey mentioned, I just want to say that if you have questions, please pop them into the Q&A section. We'll try if it's in the chat, but if it's in the Q&A section, it's much easier. And I know there's a lot of material. So again, if we want to stop and slow down in any piece, that's really important. Also, because we're having this translated, I actually am trying to keep myself to talk a little bit slower than I usually talk. As you can tell, I'm very enthusiastic and excitable about this topic. And the crazy part is I've been teaching it for over 25 years, and I'm still this excited about child development. Okay, so here are those 5 areas that we talk about with child development. We're going to dive into that a little bit more. So the milestone, like I said, is a skill acquired within a specific time window. It's a sequence, it moves in order. Each step builds on the other. And because kids usually acquire the milestones in a time frame or a window, we can predict when they're going to meet those skills. Okay. So this is that piece where it's predictable. But again, I just want to keep emphasizing this notion of us slowing down and watching the child development and encouraging and supporting it as we go, not to impose on the child's innate drives. We'll talk a little bit about like what treatment looks like and things like that. But just again, that whole idea of the wonder of this process. I mean, it's remarkable. Everyone gets excited about AI and talks about AI and robots and all that stuff. That programming is based on this, which is human and innate. AI and robots are just replicas of us as human beings. So we're going to talk about how we monitor this development process, right? So we do these 3 things: surveillance, screening, and evaluation or assessment. And when we are doing surveillance, what we're really doing is just regularly checking the child's development. And it should be everybody who's involved with the child, right? So parents, grandparents, um, daycare, childcare, uh, aunts, uncles, the pediatrician, nurses, anybody who's working with kids, just kind of have this in mind. I will, by the time you leave here, you'll feel very comfortable with being able to do this. The next piece is screening, and that's a standardized way of identifying kids who need more help or close observation and connecting parents to resources. We'll spend time talking about the screener that we use a lot called the Ages and Stages screener. We'll talk about that actually in detail so you can get a sense of what that might look like and where you can have parents take a look at it, and also resources that are connected to it. Then evaluation is when we reach a point where kids need stuff. We want to get them to services, and we want to create a plan of like how to treat. Now, when you treat children with developmental concerns, the part is, and this is why it's that parent-child piece, right? If I did an hour of speech and language for a 3-year-old, it will not do that much good. If I take an hour of time and teach the parent what they can do to help their child's speech and language, then that's going to have the impact. So parents are not just partners, they're critical to their child's development. And speaking of critical, and this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I'll walk you through this busy slide just to give you a sense of like how early this is happening. This is what's going on in the child's brain. And there are in the dark what's known as critical periods. The light blue is the critical period starts to lessen. And the critical period is the period where the learning and growth is the easiest. Now, you can see with vision, it happens right at birth. The next 2 are the ones that I really want to point you to. Within the first year of life, how we manage our emotions starts to really become critical, and our habitual ways of responding, the way that we respond to the world in that first year of life is when it starts. And by 3, we start seeing the world a certain way. Now, you can change things. You can change things anytime in your life. It's just a lot harder. The next one that I want to point out is peer skills, right? Like when we think about kids playing with each other, at first they play next to each other. Then they start playing with each other. And that's actually very developmentally appropriate. And it's all part of their skills. Take a look with the language. I love this because it says language is happening early in the first year. I actually think language is happening in utero. I think parents having good language experiences and thinking about how do they explain the world to their child from the time their child is born is critical. And then in the more kind of like how our thinking processes develop, like the idea of symbols is starting to show up within a year, within that first to second year. And then one of my favorites is relative quantity is like big and small, right? Like if you ask a little one their ideas of what big and small are, start looking a lot more like what we do as adults by four, right? So it's just interesting how and when these different pieces develop. And again, it just gets back to human beings are incredibly complex, and we're continually learning about humans and our development and getting more deeply in it and how the brain develops. So again, I'm always excited. As I'm looking at this slide, the slide's from 1999. I think I needed to update it. Such a good visual, but what we're learning, there's probably some changes even to this slide. Okay. So let's come back to this whole piece of monitoring child um, development, why it's so important, right? Again, with those critical windows, you can see if we catch a problem earlier, it allows for earlier treatment where it's more effective and it's more efficient. In those critical periods of growth in the brain and body, that's where we want to really be paying close attention. And most children who would benefit from early intervention services aren't identified until they start school when there's more eyes on them. So again, comes back to that whole idea of, you know, earlier the better and the potential impacts, right? Developmental delays, learning disorders, and social emotional behavioral issues are estimated to affect 16% or 1 in 6 children. Now, if we add children who are at risk, meaning that if we teach the parents certain things that they start doing, the kids have more enriched experiences. Using scissors as an example, when we started one of our programs, kids weren't able to use scissors. Parents were afraid, understandably so. So we got safety scissors. They're scissors that cut just paper, nothing else. So again, giving kids exposure to things help. And in my experience, all parents want to do the best for their kids. We don't always give them the information that's best for them to help their children, right? So that's the other part. So currently in California, only about 50% of kids are getting screening um, and only 25% of the kids in Medi-Cal. Now, these numbers might have changed over time, but the whole idea is that we as a society can do a better job. Now, again, I like to make the economic case for my friends that aren't as motivated by wanting each child to reach their full potential like I am. But if I put it in economic terms, when we catch kids early, it improves graduation from high school, their ability to hold a job, their ability to live independently as adults. It decreases teen pregnancy, juvenile delinquency, and it also decreases violent crime. To me, it's the best investment we could ever make is to really support and nurture parents and children, particularly when they're little. The estimated cost savings are 30 to 100,000 per child in a lifetime. I think it's much, much more than that. And so let's talk a little bit about that surveillance. And again, I have this website up, and again, it's a website that I know is reliable. This is the family-facing side of my professional organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics. Um, and it's called healthychildren.org. And the AAP parenting website has like all these ages and stages. It has the general information, specific stuff. The material on there is just top notch. I know one of the editors, they just are fantastic. They do a great job and they're always keeping things up to date. I tease them that there's maybe too much information. So, like, how do you manage your way through it? So, this is a couple of good links to help you manage through the first site. The next site is really important. I had to check it because there are changes at the CDC, but luckily, I think this stuff is still under the radar. And you might be asking, why does the Center for Disease Control have materials on child development? Again, what I had mentioned about child abuse. They came at it looking at how do we prevent, because it's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they said this piece of understanding milestones is really critical. So they have this beautiful little app that tracks your child's milestones from ages 2 months to 5 years. There's great stuff on the app. There's great stuff on their web pages, which I put there. And the app has videos and pictures. And it's just really great material, right? So again, these are two incredibly reliable sources for child development information. And let me show you what the CDC sheet looks like. It's just fantastic, right? So think about this. If you work with parents before they go to their pediatrician, you can print one of these off. And it just, says like child's name, their age, and today's date, right? Like you go into the doctor's and you have that like right there in front of you of all these little milestones. We'll be diving deeper into one category. I don't want to spend all the training time talking about specifics. That's how we did it in the old days when the information was concentrated. Today, the information is available everywhere. The key thing is what's the good information. But you can see this sheet is so visually appealing and it's so beautiful. And it lists the little things that you just need to be looking for in this phase of surveillance, right? This kind of generalized looking, do we need to look deeper? So I've talked a lot about this, and it's some of it can be very like theoretical or in our heads. So let's talk about one of my favorite areas, speech and language. Um, there's so much of what we do that's based on that. So let's dive in a little bit deeper on speech and language to give a little more context. Then we'll zoom out again to the actual formal screening. So in the first 6 months are really, really crucial to a child's language development. I know this seems hard to believe for some people, but children just take this all in. Remember how I was mentioning that you put a child in an environment where one language is spoken, they'll learn that language. You put them in another, they'll speak that language. My mom always tells this story about when she went back to India and my niece was about 2.5, and she's a very, very intelligent, very verbal child. And she would speak different languages to the different people in the household. Her grandma spoke one language. She spoke a language at school. She spoke a language at home. They had people that helped around the house. They spoke a different language. She spoke that language. And she was like the little universal translator. But she grew up in an environment rich with all of that. So its first 6 months is really critical. And again, 1 in 14 children, about 7% of kids will have an issue. And many of the problems can persist through school and adulthood if we don't work on it. No surprise, if you can't express yourself, you'll express yourself through your behaviors. And we end up labeling things behavior problems when they're behavioral problems secondary to frustration with communication. So we want to detect it and treat it early, ideally within between 2 and 3. And again, as I mentioned, the thing about language that's so fascinating is there is our ability to take in language, receptive language, and then there's expressive language, our ability to use language, right? So both of those are important components. Sometimes you'll see one without the other, but sometimes you'll see them both together. And so it becomes really important, right? And so when you're looking at speech and language, you want to look and make sure that there isn't a hearing issue, like a issue with the hearing. There are children that are born deaf. And interestingly enough, with autism, not all children with autism have language delays, but they're frequently there. And often they're the piece that helps us understand the diagnosis and identify it. The other issue is intellectual disabilities. There are a variety of intellectual disabilities that can cause language delays. Dyslexia and other learning disabilities are related to language delays. So again, the language delay sometimes will help us understand the intellectual capacities, or something like dyslexia where things are transposed. So it becomes very important just that language is such a great marker for us to pay really close attention. Now, severe neglect and abuse also can lead to speech and language problems. And that's another great set of resources at CalTrin to be thinking about some of those pieces as well. And those you can take a deeper dive on as well. So let's go real specific. What do they look like, right? So let's do that first 18 months that I was talking about. So in that first 6 months, they respond to their own name. They make a wide variety of sounds like ba ba mama dada. They'll shake their heads no. They'll understand a simple word or simple command. This is all within a year. Then this next window that's so critical is this 1 year to 1.5. And they'll use a simple word. They'll ask for food or drink with words. They'll point to a desired object. They'll point to the correct picture when asked, show me doggy, right? So again, you can see that I'm talking about speech and language, but you can see how it's intertwined with the other areas, and we'll talk about that more. But again, just giving you a little snapshot of the level of detail. And instead of me kind of listing everything, all like the resources I mentioned earlier will help you follow along with your own child or help parents follow along with their own child. So in this work, you learn some interesting things, and there's some folks that do amazing research. And one of those folks that does amazing research um, is in this area of parent ease, right? Like that language that we use, right? So parents speak to their kids. They speak to them directly. It sounds happy and engaged. It helps children tune in socially to their parents and respond, even if it's a babble, right? And you all know that it's like it's regular speech, but elongated vowels, exaggerated tone. I'm doing a little bit of it now. If my dog was in the room, I would do a lot more. He's my four-legged toddler. And so, like, I get excited and I sound really silly when I talk to my dog. Same way I do when I'm talking with toddlers and babies. I sound silly, but it actually really helps with parents that are coached early to do this. Their kids will have a lot more words than groups that aren't coached on doing this, right? And so, what does that look like? And we'll talk about this several times because it's so critical. It's, this joint attention and taking turns, right? So we've come to understand that turn taking, that back and forth, they call it serve and return, is so critical for brain growth, right? So you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That rhythm of back and forth starts when you're in utero, when you're in your mom's belly. The in and out that you're hearing is your mother's heartbeat. Isn't that fascinating? That back and forth is so deeply rooted in our biology, and it continues within our own hearts, but it always starts with our mother's hearts. That's for all you moms out there. That's how important your hearts are. So we're going to continue with the words, right? So now at a year and a half to two, kids can follow simple directions. They use at least 10 words. They follow two-part directions. They use two-word sentences. They enjoy singing and songs. Um, I just on a side note, I still remember my cousin's daughter when she was like uh, in this time period. We were driving along, and I'm with my cousin's wife, and the little one who's now a teacher herself in her mid 20s said, Mommy, hallelujah," and her mom, without missing a beat, goes and skips the CD player to Michael, row your boat ashore, hallelujah, right? So this little one was asking for that song, and like here I am in the passenger seat, just cracking up at this incredibly beautiful communication between a little 18-month-old and the mother being so well attuned that she knew exactly. So to this day, we still tell that joke, Mommy, hallelujah. And so between 2 and 3, now they start talking in 2 to 3 word sentences. They talk clearly most of the time. Our rule of thumb as pediatricians is at 2 years, you should understand half of what a child says. At 3 years, you should understand 75% of what a child says. They'll use, prepositions in, under, or bed, or beside, sorry. They'll use pronouns, not always correctly, he, she, you, I, me. They'll use them. They're not always correct. One of my favorites is me do instead of I do, which I always found adorable. So again, this is that interesting part, right, of understanding child speech. Now, when I say understanding, it's somebody else understanding. Like I have seen kids with bad language delays, and they'll make sounds, and the parent knows what they want. But that's another piece where you start teaching the parent, like let's work on this, so that your child's language will increase. So to that, they've actually studied this, and there's a big study that came out, and it's an interesting study because there's some controversy around it. But let's take the best learning point out of this. So they studied families of different socioeconomic groups, and it seemed that the groups in the higher socioeconomic groups, by the time their children were 3, they had more words. Now, again, your words and your words usage is really helpful in terms of your lifelong success. I mean, obviously, I'm biased because here I am talking to you all. And so obviously, I care about using language. Now, the interesting part about this is when parents who were in the lower SES were like, they did focus groups and they said, "Hey, what's your understanding of this?" And right away, as soon as they understood that talking to your kids made a difference to their lives, they jumped in and they did it. They wanted to do it. So this isn't, to me, this is an issue of socioeconomics. This is an issue of what information do you have? And are we getting parents the good information early? And like the Harlem Early Learning Project, a beautiful project that engages the whole community, they talk to their parents, and those parents just would do anything for their kids. And so they just started talking to them, and we saw increases in their children's language skills. So again, these some of the assumptions that we have around socioeconomics are wrong. Um, I use it only as a proxy about what information are people getting, and we just need to get families the right information because all parents want the best for their children. Okay, so I'm going to slow it down. Again, a lot of information, but how do we use this information and what do we do for the parent, right? So again, coming back to that parent development role, right? So this engagement of the parent and child are critical. Attachment, attunement, and the nurturing relationships, right? And so we want them also to have the opportunity for their kids to feel safe to explore and play, right? We want parents to be face to face when talking. As I mentioned, that back and forth turn taking is really critical. Respond based on the baby's behavior or the child's or baby's behavior and actions, right? You want to make sure that your attention is on the same thing. So that's that idea of shared attention. You want to use social cues like pointing and eye gaze to communicate with young children, even before they can speak. And again, this idea of play and self-directed child play where we follow the child really helps them learn, right? And we have to adjust it based on their temperament and their abilities and the needs of the kids, right? So again, this whole thing of each child is individual and we need to be able to respond to the child, right? Now, here's the one that I'm really big on. We have to support caregivers and help reduce their stress. That comes back to those concrete supports, parent resiliency they were talking about in this protective factors framework, right? We have to do better as a society. And I would say we spend money on things that I don't think are important, and we don't spend money on the things I think that are important. So again, I think one of the biggest things is in all of the work that you do, keep in mind that parents want the best for their kids. Keep in mind that all parents deserve and need support because we all experience stress, right? And I wish I didn't have to say deserve, but we do in our society say that all families need and deserve support, right? Because we live in a society where some people think others don't need things. And again, I think all families need support, right? Um, Now, really quickly on this joint attention and how quickly kids learn, one of my nieces, when she was 1, I taught her the sign for more, which is you put your hands in front of you and you just kind of pull them away, right? Like these little fingers. If you get, we're on the slide, so you can't see me do it. But that sign more was really funny because we taught her that to say it around food. And then one day I was playing with her, I made her giggle, and she did that sign back to me at age 1 to do that again. So again, this whole thing about how kids learn to communicate is just amazing, right? And so baby signs a great piece to engage. Again, parents just are amazing if we give them the right tools and supports. Speaking of which, let me tell you a quick story because again, so much of this has been information. So let's make it a little bit more real. I'm going to share a story of a mom that came to us for services. Now, our services, we treat kids with mild or moderate concerns. It's very unique here in San Diego County, funded through a tobacco tax. I'll share more about my program later, but let me give you a quick story. So Caroline's a little 4-year-old. She frequently needs to be picked up from daycare. The daycare says that she melts down. She's not able to communicate, and then she melts down. And they think, well, they tell the mom maybe she has a speech and language problem. So the mom, it's a single mom, she's worried she's going to lose her job because she has to pick up Carolyn so many days so often. She's so stressed. She's so worried, right? She wants to keep a roof over their head and make sure they have food, right? So she's stressed, right? She comes in and she says, I think my child has a speech and language problem. So our folks talk with her and say, well, you know what? Let's put you in a class so that we can work on that speech and language. So they put her in a class, and why they put her in the class was they wanted to be able to observe her a little bit more. And the person who did the assessment was like, I think this mom is not in sync with her baby. No judgment, just saying I'm not in sync with my her little girl, right? I keep saying baby, little girl. Maybe I'll just call her baby girl. So the interesting part is they said, we think to the mom, they said, you mentioned that there was some behavior problems. Let's make sure you go over to our behavior provider as you're doing these classes, and let's see what happens. Well, sure enough, this is a great mom. She's a wonderful human being. And sure enough, within 3 sessions with the behavioral provider who worked on, the behavioral provider noticed that the mom and the child were out of sync. And so they spent time just helping the mom learn how to be in sync with her child. This mom's great. Within 3 sessions, she's got it down, right? She continued the behavioral service because she was gaining so many skills, right? So she gains these skills. Now we send her to the speech and language person to do individual speech and language work. It was an incredible success. It was such a success. This mom's like, what other classes do you have? I want any class you have. The other part, which is this far more significant part for me, is this mom felt good about helping her child, and her relationship with her child went from my child is problematic and stressing me to I love my daughter. She's so beautiful and amazing. Right now, she thought that still, even when things were stressful, but this brought that out, right? Now, if that's not the best thing ever, I don't know what is, right? This little girl now is going to go on and have a much better chance to have success. This mom's going to have a much better relationship with her little one. Loved her daughter, even when things were hard, but now with the skills and the support, she's able to really see this. In most systems that we're going to talk about, this mom would go to get speech and language services. And again, we don't always have this bandwidth to be able to see this piece of the mom and child being in sync. If she would have done just the speech and language services, they might not have done well, right? Just that piece about the relationship is so important. So we'll talk about that throughout this is the relationships. Okay. So I wanted to give you a story that was just a bit more real and bring it to life. My joke is I have thousands and thousands of those stories. It's just amazing what we can do as a community. So let's talk about the recommended screening. So my professional organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, you might have heard a little bit about us in the news lately because we do think children should be immunized because it's the most studied thing out there. So we've had to fight for things that we think are important. But when it comes to the developmental behavioral screenings, we want at minimum children to get a screening at 9 months, 18 months, and 30 months, right? We want screening for autism spectrum disorders. And we'll talk about autism a little bit later because it's um, very prevalent. And so, one of the things that's so important is as a parent, you know your child best. So if you think your child has a delay, don't wait. Acting early can make a big difference. That's what we want today. If you're parents to use these tools, if you're working with parents for you to share these tools, right? So here's what happens in San Diego County. We have these kind of screenings. We have these different services. We'll talk about these services. But before we do that, let's talk about the recommended screening tools. So I mentioned earlier this tool called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. It's the third version. It's called the ASQ3 for short, and it has 19 questionnaires. It was designed for parents to do, so it's not written in, it's written in third grade language. Um, and there's questionnaires at 4, 6, 8, and you can see the list of months, pretty much every 2 months or so until kids get older, then it spreads out a little bit to 3 months. But there's 30 items in each, and those 30 items go over communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, equaling cognitive development, and personal social development. Now you'll see that the social emotional development isn't included. Social emotional development is a little bit more complex. So there's another tool also known as the Ages and Stages, but it's a social emotional questionnaire, and it's in its second version. We'll talk about that in after we talk about the ASQ. So here's the basics about the ASQ. The domains and the overall sections address parents' concerns. I'm sorry, it's a 4th to 6th grade reading level. I thought 3rd for some reason. Illustrations are provided where possible, and parents just say yes sometimes or not yet. I love the not yet. It's not saying they're not doing it. It's not saying anything bad. It's just not yet. And the program staff converts it over to point values. You total that, and then we have cutoffs that help us decide what do we do next. Now, what's really interesting is Easter Seals offers this online as a free screening tool. So I think that's really important that, again, families have that resource. So let's dive into the other tool that I mentioned. It's, again, ages and stages questionnaire, social emotional, and it's designed for that, just social emotion, right? So the first one has the personal social domain, right? So those questions, can they meet their own need, like their self-care needs, age appropriate manner, like getting themselves dressed, knowing their name from other names, right? So that's, again, personal social. It's linked to the social emotional development, but it's just how these tools work, right? So in contrast, the ASQ SE2 is broader and more complex, right? Because that's the social emotional development is a little bit more complex. So these questionnaires include items in 7 key areas. You don't need to learn all of these. It's just to kind of say there's really good um, science and research behind it. So the areas are self-regulation, compliance, social communication, adaptive function, autonomy, affect, and interaction with people, right? So just kind of saying there's some really rich psychological backing to this. And this has fewer questionnaires. There's 9. They contain 30 developmental questions. Same thing, there's raw scores, but if there's like one that's way out there, you can also do that. Again, the reading levels 4th to 6th grade. Illustrations were possible. Again, the same thing. Yes, no, sometimes. I'm sorry, yes, sometimes, and not yet. And the program staff um, converts that. So again, we have to just meet families where they're at. We have to tailor our communication to their level of readiness to hear and act on information. A lot of times our families just need to be in groups with other parents and see other kids before they're ready. Parents' emotional state is important, their education level, their cultural beliefs, their resources, and their ability to use the system. So again, we need to pay attention to all of this, right? So sometimes the first place that people bring it up is at the doctor's office. So again, a lot of information that I'm giving you here, okay? But I wrote it out because this is what I would love for parents to do when they come see me, right? Schedule appointments specifically to discuss the developmental concerns. If you have a concern, schedule appointment specifically. When you call their office, here's a little script. I'd like to make appointments to the doctor because I'm concerned about my child's development. Be very specific. Before you go, write down your concerns, right? Make sure any of the behaviors that worry your symptoms are written down, right? Now, why do I say this? I go to the doctor, I write things down. I leave the doctor's office with a set of notes because if I don't, I'll forget what happened. I'll forget what I said. And I have an MD, I have a doctor, I'm a medical doctor, I've got a master's in public health. I would forget. So parent with a child, much harder, right? Much more challenging. So write it down. And those sheets that I shared earlier give you this great information, right? Be specific about your concern. Ask for clarification if you don't understand things. There's a joke in my family that my older brother one time asked me a question and I answered it, and he goes, "Could you do that in English?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he goes, "You're speaking that doctor language that none of us really understand, but you guys think we do." I go, "Oh, okay." And so, he made a point. Like, my mom's a doctor, I'm a doctor. He goes, "You guys do that doctor talk. We don't understand what you're saying." Uh, Honestly, a little bit hard to hear at the time, but it served me well my whole life because of that, right? So if you don't ask, if you don't understand, ask. You deserve to understand. Ask about the next steps. Be prepared for additional testing or appointments and follow through with that, right? So those are really big things. So yes, the doctor's office is the place we start, but where could you go? So there's this term earlier intervention, which we'll talk about a little bit, but there's these programs that are mandated by the federal government called Early Start or Regional Center. And I'll talk about those in more detail, but and the schools are required to through the Individuals with Disabilities Act. There's some laws that are in place that we'll talk about all of these different programs that are mandated, right? And then the states have to match. So these are important pieces. In California, we have something known as California Children's Services. We'll talk about that, but that's for the kids that are more medically fragile, right? So this is really for the more severe. So this is the 1 to 2% of kids. Remember, I said it's up to 24% of kids need help. So we just need to do a better job and commit more resources. The other issue that's always been an issue is they're complicated systems. Families need support to get through these systems. And we have some innovative programs that are happening locally and throughout the state of California, but we just need to do a better job of helping families navigate. And we'll talk about some of those services as we go. But first off, what is early intervention? So this is the term used to describe services and supports that help babies and toddlers from birth to 3 years of age in most states and territories. Okay. And it may include speech services, physical therapy, occupational therapy. It can have a significant ability for a child's ability to learn new skills and increase their success. And programs are available in every state. And we'll talk about how you can get there, how they can get them. They're often free or on a sliding scale, depending on what the child's needs are. So again, what do we do when we get there? When you call, again, I have this like as a little script. If you call, you can say, I'm concerned about my child's development. I would like to request an evaluation. Can you help me or let me speak with someone who can? Again, like the pediatrician's office, be ready to share your specific concern about your child, and you'll be asked for some general information. Make sure you write down who you spoke with, the date, what you said. You might need the information later. There's a requirement of how they have to respond to you, right? But write it down. We can't remember all of these things. So just write it down, put it notes in your phone, but just have it somewhere where you can get it. So in California, we have services through something called Regional Center and Early Start, which partners with the schools. And it's for kids up to about the age of 3. It requires a parent referral with some disability or some risk factors. They will assess all areas of development and they provide speech development, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and some mental health, right? And this is through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Part C. And you can see there's this link here that will get you to that if you're in a different state. Each state has that. The top one is for California. The second one was we noticed there's folks from all over the country joining us. So we want to make sure you have those resources as well. So the school districts take all ages. And again, depending on what's going on, sometimes regional center is better. They will treat deaf and blind children under 3 because, again, part of the federal rules. Otherwise, between 3 and 5, when we refer, it's a parent referral, and you have to have at least one area of disability, and you must be at a certain level to qualify. And when you say I'm concerned in this area, they will only assess in that area. So if you're concerned in 2 areas, say 2 areas, right? And the hard part for me is in San Diego County, which is a big county. We have some 40 plus school districts. In each one, the treatment varies from each one. It's just how it is, unfortunately. And again, this is that Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, Part B. So these are federally mandated. And again, when you call your local elementary school or board, and again, if you're under 3, I'd start with regional center. At 3, start with the schools, and it's the same language. It's what I said on the earlier slide. It's that whole piece of being very specific, share your concerns, write down who you spoke with, right? So you can see there's a pattern here that we want you to know. Okay. Now, the other place you can go through is the Exceptional Family Resource Center, which is related to both of these entities, and they provide peer-to-peer support. And you can locate the note, I've got a link here where you can locate the nearest one in California and San Diego County and Imperial County. I have those links. But again, the whole idea here is these are other parents that have been through the system that they are there to help and often work to do intake. We'll talk about some other resources in a couple slides in other areas in the state of California. But again, these are some of the big resources that are available. I had mentioned earlier California Children's Services, and that is for specific diagnoses like cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, Downs, epilepsy. They provide the diagnostic and treatment services, medical management, physical occupational therapy for children under 21. It does require a physician's referral, and there is a sliding scale for payment. This is the program that if your child is born with a significant disability, we don't want you to go bankrupt. So these are those services. Here in San Diego County, we've built this system called Healthy Development Services. So we actually treat a lot more kids with those mild to moderate concerns that don't qualify for the others. And you can just see it's a model of 3 levels of care, both on development and behavior and care coordination. We have it in the middle, but really it is the glue that keeps everything together. And so again, this is a model that I'd love to find a way to do nationally. I'm hoping after all the chaos that we're going through currently that there'll be an opportunity to rebuild things with these ideas in mind, where we take care of all children and families. And so in California, outside of San Diego County, many of the counties have what's known as Help Me Grow. And also this funding comes from First Five, that tobacco tax, back from 1998, I believe. And so there's just a local network of partners that help with development and early intervention, connecting families. They educate and train local providers. They provide tools and resources to support screenings and referrals, and collecting and reporting data around developmental screening. So again, these are things that are available. So whatever county you are in, look for Help Me Grow and your local county First Five to see what resources they have. So what can you do while you wait? Well, unfortunately, as you heard me talk about, we just don't have the right services or enough services everywhere. So families are going to have to wait, sometimes weeks, sometimes months before they can get an appointment, right? And start. It can be very frustrating for parents who want answers and help now. It's just, we want the best for our children. If you find yourself in this situation, know there's some simple things you can do today and every day to help your child's development. So what can you do? Uh, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but this whole piece of support parents is the key. Help them feel empowered, show them how to create secure attachment, which we'll talk about, in a healthy emotional environment. Have them play, because play is really how children learn and think. Use screening tools to show the educational component. Many of these tools, like the ages and stages, they have activity lists. So if you have a concern, you just put the ages and stages, 18 months, list of activities, and their sheets, which used to always be hard to get, are on the internet, and their activities there. And so help them with those developmental activities in their daily routines, like narrating what's going on, having them pull the laundry basket for you. There's just all of these little things that you can do, and there's just so many lists of things that you can do. So again, encourage them to tap into those. Now, there's some things that we don't want to do, right? We don't want to compare to other siblings. So they keep talking about that, each kid is different. No blaming. We don't blame, we don't label. And let's help them not assume treatment's too expensive, because a lot of the stuff is showing them what are the right activities that will help them, like what specific activity will help them, right? And one of the things that drives me crazy is when people say, oh, they'll outgrow it. Oh, his cousin was like this. Oh, his father was like this. No, just encourage, development always, everywhere that you can. And again, there's so many resources out there. And we will talk about that parents are stressed right now, but when you can give parents something they can do to help their child, and they see that it helps their child, it brings them great joy, right? So we also need to focus in on those positives. So let's jump into social emotional development. Again, a lot of words here on this slide. They say don't use so many words, but I'm hoping that this is a resource for you. So, okay, social emotional includes the child's experiences, expressions, and management of their emotions, and their ability to establish positive and rewarding relationship with others. Okay. includes the ability to identify and understand one's own feelings, to accurately read and comprehend the emotional states of others, to manage strong emotions in their expression in a constructive way. I would put this down as a lifelong skill. To regulate one's own behavior, another lifelong skill, and to develop empathy for others and to establish and maintain relationships, right? So these are very key as a key definition. So what does it look like? It's like this. It's having some self-awareness, being able to manage oneself, having social awareness, having relationship skills, and having decision making, right? So again, I sometimes laugh that we use words like social emotional development, early childhood mental health, and people just get turned off because they don't know what that means. This is what it means. It's that ability to have good and healthy relationships. Another word that's very funny that we use in the development field is one of those skills. It's called executive function, right? And one of my colleagues, who's a pediatrician, when we were talking about this, just laughed his head off. He's like, what does that mean? Like they hire and fire people? Like what a silly name, executive function. But what it means is it's a set of mental skills that we use to manage our daily lives. So you can just really think about it as what do you need to do to be able to manage your way in this world? How do you focus? How do you follow directions? How do you handle your emotions? How do you learn to control your behavior, pay attention, develop thinking skills, sequences? So just some of the things are to make it a little bit more realistic are these, right? The ability to start a task, the ability to pay attention, the ability to prioritize, plan ahead, follow multiple step directions, time management, remember details, understand different points of view, regulate emotions, complete a task, shift focus, organize. So you can see there are these very important things that we need to be very specific about in helping kids learn those skills and encourage those skills and give them opportunities for growth. So again, that's a whole bunch of information. And what that brings us to is the ideas of where are those good resources. One of my favorites is this organization called 0 to 3. It's been around for 30 plus years. Their materials are wonderful. They have some great materials on social emotional development. There's also the Center for Social Emotional Development and Early Childhood Care. So that's the folks that help the early care and education world, daycare folks. Really beautiful materials that are really, really, really powerful, right? So again, a lot of information. It's very rich. Hopefully, I'm not speaking so fast that my translators aren't too upset with me. I know it's a lot of information. I know when we try to translate this into different languages, it's not always so easy because you're trying to get some concepts across, and I do tend to talk fast. So my apologies for that. I'm going to dive into a little bit more material before we go to the break. But again, I encourage folks to think about questions, to see what things popped for you, what things you have questions about. But I want to dive into this next section around self-regulation. This builds on what we were just talking about with executive function, right? So the way to think about it is it's the act of managing our thoughts and feelings to enable us to goal-directed activities. And it includes a variety of behaviors that are necessary for success in school, relationships, in the workplace, right? So it develops through interaction with caregivers, such as parents, teachers, coaches, and other mentors. Again, we come back to it depends on predictable, responsive, supportive environments. And teaching adults in caregiving roles to promote self-regulation can be powerful. There's a whole concept of co-regulation, which we'll come to shortly. But again, I say self-regulation. It sounds like you have to develop it yourself. No, it happens in the context of relationships. And just to give you a metaphor to kind of think about is let's think about a car, right? When you are in a car, and we think about regulating managing ourselves, sometimes you need to speed up, sometimes you need to slow down, right? But you also have to consider, is the engine in good shape? Is the gas tank full? What speed are we going? There's other gauges. There's the tires, right? So that's like our body, thinking about that. But then we have to pay attention to stuff outside of our body, the roads, the weather, the traffic, right? So think about driving ourselves like we would a car. There's times we need to speed up. There's times we need to slow down. There's things that we have to take care of within our own body. And there's things that we need to pay attention outside of us. Right? So how does this all start happening? Well, Let's focus on emotional regulation because that'll take us into some of the areas of development. So babies and young children orient to parents' reactions, right? So much of that is nonverbal. Babies and young children regulate their internal emotions by asking for comfort. Parents help babies and young children learn to soothe themselves, right? They can't do it by themselves. When you are a baby, you need your parent to regulate you externally, right? Sometimes when babies are sleepy, we need to wake them up a little so they'll eat. Sometimes babies are too excited. We need to help them calm down. So this whole piece of managing your emotions starts so early, right? And parents model how emotions are identified and coped with. Right? And again, the way that a family expresses emotions, children just pick up on. And also how families do things, you know, gives you the range of emotions permitted in their household. I tell this story because I think a lot of people have the similar piece. In my household, nobody else was allowed to get mad. My dad was, but nobody else was. And my dad never said, I'm sorry. He said, I just started talking with you more. And that's just how it was. And that's how I learned about anger, right? And again, it's one of those things where it's not good or bad. That was the level of skills that he had at the time. It was very common of men of his generation. And I don't hold it against him. It's just, I learned later in life. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And that range of emotions is also where you kind of tip as a family. I think of myself as a very positive, encouraging person. My joke is my brother's even more so, and I never thought I could find anybody more positive than my brother, but his wife is. So, like, their kids are just incredibly positive, right? And so that's kind of that way of what they've learned from their parents. So we can see problems with emotional regulation early. There's infants that are irritable. There was a time period where there was a fussy baby network, and we'll talk about like why babies sometimes can be fussy. It's their own temperament, their own biology. Right? You can see as early as three acting out aggressive, lack of compliance, withdrawing. They can tell guilty stories. Um, so again, you see these things early, including difficulty with relationships. Now, I mentioned difference in our biology, and that's called temperament. And one of the things that's really interesting when we teach parents about temperament, it's really important because kids have temperaments, adults do too, right? So temperaments are kind of inborn behavior. Now, there is some ability to change it, but these 9 characteristics have been identified. And when we understand our own temperament, it helps us figure out how we're going to respond to our child, whether their temperament's the same as ours or different, right? So activity level, distractibility, intensity, regularity, their like sensory threshold, like do you get overwhelmed? Um, when people approach you, some kids will pull back, some kids will come towards you, right? Adaptability. Are you slow to warm up or slow to change or not? Persistence, our ability to stick with things. Mood. These things are relatively inborn, and there are temperament checklists that are fantastic. And again, a lot of times parents will find, oh, my child's different than me in their temperament. And how do I, work with that? Because it's different than mine. So all of this is just, again, the richness of all of this. There's so many layers to it. And when we think about the social skills milestones, there's things like under 6, the social smile can distinguish their mom from others, smiles, coos, pats at their own image in the mirror. At 6 months, they reach for familiar people. They play social games like peekaboo or patty cake. They'll push away unwanted things. They'll drop requested objects into the person's hands. And then as we get older, they'll give hugs and kisses between 1 year and 2. They'll hug a doll or a stuffed animal. They'll greet you with hi. Comes to the parent for help. They get your attention by pulling on your clothes. Between 18 months and 2 years, they'll say no when interfered with. In fact, it becomes their favorite word. They'll usually respond to correction. They'll show sympathy for other children. They'll rock, dress, or feed their dolls and stuffed animals. They're beginning to build a sense of self. And then between 2 and 3, they start playing with other kids, but usually, again, at 3, it starts becoming more interaction. But between 2 and 3, they go from that parallel play to playing with other kids. They'll help with simple tasks. They'll play roles and pretend games, right? Like I'm a superhero, I'm a firefighter. They can easily be frustrated because they're learning so much. Plays briefly besides other kids and gets excited with other kids. Again, that's that parallel play rather than playing with by three. Imitate others, especially adults and older children. I joke at this point they're little parrots. Be careful what you say. And over time, they show more and more independence and they show their defiance. So people know about the terrible twos. The terrible threes sometimes are worse, just depends on the child. And then 3 to 4, they start showing concerns. Um, they copy adults and friends. They take turns in games. They separate from their parents, sometimes wanting their friends more than their parents, showing a wide range of feelings and emotions. This is the time where we really want to work with parents about helping their kids' big emotions. They enjoy their routines and they might get upset with change. They dress and undress themselves. They enjoy helping with simple household tasks, and they're able to start verbalizing their toileting needs. So we're going to jump into autism because that's one of those issues around this area, right? So autism is actually a neurological and developmental disorder that affects people, how they interact with people and communicate, learn, and behave, right? Symptoms generally appear in the first 2 years of life, difficulty with communication and interaction with others, restricted interest or repetitive behavior, symptoms that affect their ability to function at work, school, and other areas of life. So here's the part. Autism is known as a spectrum disorder because there's a wide variation in the types and severities of symptoms. People may behave and communicate and interact and learn in different ways, and it's higher than this now. It's like 1 in 30 children. Specific intervention is really critical. Social development screening is the MCHAT that I mentioned earlier. So let me just stop for a second to just say most recently there's an article in Science that looked at individuals with autism and it was able to see different groups. Now we've lumped them all together, so you're seeing more. I'm always asked, why is there a higher incidence? Um, and I always say to people, we're better at identifying it and we broaden the definition. So that's part of it. I think the important part for me is I see it as kids who perceive the world differently than we do, and that we need to learn how to serve their needs. We don't need to think there's something wrong. We need to think, how do we better serve them? And what you will see is on the language side, you might see delayed language. You might see a loss of language. You might see no eye contact. They may have a sing-songy robotic voice. They may repeat things without understanding, and they may not start and sustain conversation. Some of the concerns around social behaviors. And again, I'm giving you this whole long list, but kids will have some of these or none of these, right? They'll avoid or not keep eye contact. They don't respond to their name by 9 months. They aren't showing facial expressions by 9 months, like happy, sad, angry, or surprised. They're not playing simple games, few or no gestures by 1 year. They're not sharing interests at 15 months. They don't point to show you something interesting by 18 months. They don't notice when others are hurt or upset by 2. They don't notice other children and join them in play by 3. They're not pretending. They're not singing and dancing by 5. So again, these are just some of the possibilities. Likewise, these possibilities of repeated and excessive, restricted or repetitive behaviors. Some kids will line their toys up and get upset when they're out of order. They'll repeat phrases and words over and over. They'll play with a toy the exact way every time. Is focused on a particular part of an object, like a wheel. They get upset by minor changes. They have like very obsessive interests. Everything must follow a certain order. They may flap their hands, rock their body. Those are ways of self-soothing. They may have unusual reactions to sound, smell, taste, feels, any of the senses, right? And back in 2003, as I mentioned, 4 diagnoses were compressed: autistic disorder, Asperger's syndrome, child disintegrative disorder, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. There's 3 levels of severity based on the support needed, and there are additional assessments, any genetic causes, language level, intellectual disability, presence of autism supported associated medical conditions like seizures, anxieties, GI disorders, disrupted sleep. We have some incredible specialists. And when we get to this point, that's where we need them. Okay. So we are getting close to 10:30. So I'm going to stop for a few minutes to see if there are any questions after all of that information. And we'll do a little Q&A. And then after the Q&A, we'll take a little break. You would think I almost planned that, huh?
So, there are currently no questions in the Q&A pod, but we can give everybody a few minutes if they want to put questions into. Look, I just said that and one popped in. Let's say that we are working with a family who thinks self-soothing behaviors are bad, like arm flapping, mainly due to lack of education. What can we say?
So uh, could you give an age for the child? Yeah,
Huh. 3.
3. Okay, so again, it's an important part to take a step back. So take a step, help the parent take a step back and say, what do you think your child's behavior is trying to communicate? So if you can get them to understand that they're trying to soothe themselves or trying to regulate themselves, you can help start normalizing that behavior, right? Now, again, not having seen the kid or talked to the family enough, is the family thinking it's autism? Are they thinking the child is doing it willfully? So that's really the important part to be always teasing out. Is a child's behavior a lack of will or a lack of skill? And a lot of times as adults, we think the child is just doing it because they want to do it, right? And so again, helping parents understand what's behind the behavior. So if they're arm flapping or they're doing something that's self-soothing, that's important to help them understand. Your child's trying to calm themselves down and try to regulate themselves. Are there other things that you can do that can help them? What would help you be okay with that? And really having a conversation, but also starting to say, is there anything else going on with the child? Could the child be on that autistic spectrum, right? Is there something else going on? One of the things that's really interesting that's emerged a lot in the last 10, 20 years are kids that are very sensitive to one of the senses, like kids that can't stand having tags on their clothes, right? And the parents have to cut off the tags. Um, are they too sensitive is the term we use, or are they just more perceptive? Are their sensory skills actually higher? And that we need to figure out how to help them use that, right? So kind of flipping it a little bit and exploring with families. And I think that's my answer to almost everything is explore with families. Try to understand what's underneath it, what's behind it. Is there a worry? Is there a concern? Are the parents trying to control the child because that was how they were brought up, right? So really helping understand that your child's behavior is a language and there's a need underneath it. And often regulation is something that, comes, and we'll talk more about co-regulation coming up, but it's really that thing of learning that skill of like how to soothe yourself in different ways, right? So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. One more question. How can we get a quicker diagnosis? The doctor's referrals take months and months. How can I get diagnosis sooner or diagnoses sooner and then get updated services that they need? IEP isn't enough. Is there more medical referral services to utilize?
So you have just touched on the greatest frustration of my career. This is a frustration I deal with all the time. There's just not enough services. There's a lack of services. There's a lack of navigation. There's a lack of coordination. There's a lack of communication. So I'm just going to acknowledge at the get-go, unfortunately, it's difficult. That said, there are things you can do to help, right? Being as specific and persistent as possible. Now, it's an interesting thing about diagnoses, right? So I sometimes feel like I'm saying two different things. So I'm just going to acknowledge that right off the bat, right? I like not to diagnose and label things unless it's really clear because I don't want to limit a child. At the same time, if a child has autism or another diagnoses where I know that that can get them services, I want to diagnose them early, right? So it's two different things, and it's really trying to understand that. But if you really clearly know this kid has a diagnosis, then it's really a question of trying to push the systems as hard as possible, which often requires supporting parents significantly. And I just want to drop this way of thinking into your minds. Our families are traumatized and marginalized by our systems and in their lives. And once that happened, the ability to trust systems and navigate systems and get through systems is impacted because, again, it impacts your level of trust. So we really have to hold families and be with them on this journey to help them get through this. And a lot of times it just requires a lot of pushing. The joke in my own family is my wife is a nurse, and when the kids need something, she gets it to happen and she pushes and she can be tenacious and actually a little frightening. And she looks at me and she goes, "You could do this too." And I'm like, "Not as well as you." I mean, like, she's just really tenacious. She's got that mama bear thing going, right? And it's just really interesting that you need to have that force to get things to go. So be that force with the family and encourage them. And we need to just do this at a huge scale. So,
Yeah. All right, and one more question,
okay.
and then we can head out to our break. So, does a child with Down syndrome qualify for transportation services to school preschool age?
So again, that's through regional center,
Mhm.
and they should be getting those kinds of services. The problem with all of these services is they're up and down, the requirements change. Sometimes what's available, what's not available changes. Um, because of some of the information privacy stuff, we don't always get the information that we need when we're not the family. So it's really important to either join the family when they're asking these questions or give the family like the actual like little script of what questions to ask that might help, like to just say, is my child entitled for this? And if not, why not? Where else can I get these services? And we just have to push. I mean, it's just unfortunate that we have resources. In my mind, we have resources for things that are stupid like wars, but we don't seem to have money for children and families. It doesn't make any sense to me because I know when we invest early, it makes a big difference. And so that level of frustration that you all are feeling and expressing is the level of frustration that I experienced all through my career, and just keep myself pushing and pushing and pushing on the behalf of folks that, as I say, deserve the services and supports.
Absolutely. Alrighty, so that is all of our questions for the time being. With that being said, we're going to take a 5-minute break and then we can come on back. Um,
Beliefs. Those beliefs we can see through our words and our stories, our actions and our behaviors. Okay. Now, one of the things that happens to all of us is when we're distressed, we need someone to respond to us, right? So you see in this picture the four parents are around holding their child. The little one in the middle, you can see she's got her arms up. So that means she's reaching for someone to comfort her, right? Very upset, very upset. Now, what happens is we always talk about the fight and flight response, right? So I'm sure many of you know that with stress, we feel like we either going to fight or we're going to run, right? The other thing, as we've learned over time, is freezing is another response to stress. But the thing we don't talk about the most is on the far side of the slide, which is called affiliation, right? So, truth be told, if something good happens to us, what do? We look for someone to share it with. When something bad happens, we look to someone to share it with. Where does that come from? So, as we look at this next slide, think about a toddler, right? We all know our toddlers, right? They're in their zone of regulation, we call it. So number one is at the bottom. They're calm, they're doing good. Then they get upset, and you can start seeing that they're getting a little bit, bent out of shape. But then they just lose it, right? So they have a full-on tantrum, right? And when we get to that tantrum point, essentially we've gone offline. Like our thinking part of our brain has just gone offline, and we're very instinctual. And as we start to calm down, we're a little bit more emotional. But only when we're calm can we reason. And we see so many parents, like when the kid's totally elevated, yelling at them or talking to them or telling them stuff, but the kid's just completely overloaded. So if you look on the far side of this slide, you'll see that what we really want you to do at that point is, establish safety and connection with the child, right? So help them regulate a little bit by co-regulating, meaning using yourself. And we'll talk about that again in a moment. But then when they start calming down, you can help soothe them. It's the emotional connection, but only when they're calm can we make sense of it. So we're going to go through all of like how that happens. And one of the things I want to share with you is this whole idea about attachment. This is really critical. Um, this is the basis of all our relationships. And there's a great book out there by a group of people that created a modality called Circle of Security. Now, Circle of Security is both a therapeutic intervention and a parenting intervention. And the book that they have, Raising a Secure Child, is fantastic. And you sum that up by this slide, right? You see those two sets of hands. That's us as parents and caregivers. And when things go well, kids are going to go out and explore that top part, right? They have a secure base, meaning that they know you're there. And we know with toddlers, they'll go out, but they'll look back to you to reference you, right? To make sure you're there. And they want you to interact with them by watching over them, delighting in them, helping them, enjoying them, right? But we also know that when you explore the world, you have what I shared with that emotional reaction. We get overwhelmed, right? And we want a safe haven. We want to come back and be protected, comforted, and we want help with organizing our feelings. So it's that coming back, it's that lower hand. So these concepts of the secure base and safe haven are critical to developing what's known as an attachment relationship. And what I love about this model is they say, as parents, we are the hands, and we always need to be bigger, stronger, wiser, and kinder. And whenever possible, we follow our child's lead, but whenever necessary, we take charge. So this isn't one of those, oh, just do what your children want and follow them. This is a very thoughtful way of parenting. And it's a beautiful book. And there's actually a book that's an intervention book by the same folks. So I highly recommend it. But what is attachment? Attachment is there's two folks that really helped define the field, John Bowlby and then Mary Ainsworth, who studied with him, extended his work. In our early childhood, when our needs are met, it shapes our view of the world and most importantly, our capacity to form and maintain healthy relationships. So remember early on, I shared that these things are happening early in life, right? So Bowlby defined it as the enduring bond with a special person, um, security and safety within the context of a relationship. And there's soothing, comfort, and pleasure that are involved with this and the loss and threat of that special person, right? So again, these are very critical pieces. Now, Bowlby made these observations in World War II when children were often separated from their parents when bombing happened in World War II. And so he concluded that those early social attachments with infant and caregiver were essential for normal social development, and that babies and mothers have an innate tendency to connect and attach. Then Mary Ainsworth continued the research by doing something known as the strange situation. She set up a little experiment, and it proposed that infants' attachment to the caregiver differs based on their attachment styles, and the differences in that secure attachment influences personalities and relationships from infancy and beyond. And so again, there's a lot to learn about attachment. There's different attachment styles that affects our lives. I'm not going to go into it as much today, but um, the idea is we become attached to people who we attune with. And what is attunement, right? And Dan Siegel, who's another really wonderful person to read, is a pediatrician and it's like a child psychiatrist up in LA. And he says, when we attune with others, we allow our own internal state to shift and come into resonance with the inner world of another. Remember that diagram I just showed you? And at the heart of that resonance is that sense of feeling felt, right? Like, you know me, we're connected, right? Children need attunement to feel secure and develop well throughout their lives. We need that sense of attunement to feel close and connected. So again, it's very universal. So what does it look like in action? Well, when with your child, it's knowing their feelings and motivations, being able to analyze their actions and interpret those cues accurately, and provide a correct response that meets their underlying emotional need. Right? So a caregiver sees their baby crying, recognizes she's hungry, and picks her up to comfort her and feed her. A mom's comforting her toddler after he falls and skins his knee. In our adulthood, when a friend says I'm fine and you know she doesn't mean it, you dig a little deeper and you find out what's going on. That's attunement. That's a lot of that nonverbal piece, right? And with attunement, when I share it with parents, they're like, "Oh my God, I need to be attuned to my child all the time for them to attach." No, you don't. That's what one of the great child's, again, pediatrician, psychoanalyst from a while back, Donald Winnicott, talked about the idea of rupture and repair, that those ruptures are inevitable and even important for the child to develop their own sense of self. But when we become aware of that rupture, we repair by being empathetic, warm, loving, acceptance, curious, and playful. And we reconnect, right? So again, you don't need to be connected all of the time. Winnicott talked about good enough parenting, meaning that it helps foster child's independence and there's room for flexibility. Because again, we don't want parents to be judging themselves when it comes to that. So as long as your child is safe and you're connected about 40% of the time, that's good enough parenting. And so again, these are really important pieces as we message with parents that yeah, you're gonna have times when you and your child aren't connected. Also, you and your significant other, right? But it's the repair that matters. And it's important to make sure your child is safe, but it's okay for them to have these little moments of rupture. Right? What I've been talking about with self-regulation is this idea of co-regulation, right? And so again, when I was talking about babies can't regulate themselves. They need to be externally co-regulated or regulated, right? And that's just defined as that warm, responsive interaction that provides support, coaching, and modeling for children to understand and express and modulate their own feelings and behaviors, right? So with babies, they have emotions and sensations. They don't have thoughts. So they cry and you respond, and you see how that attachment relationship, again, that back and forth creates this. So again, co-regulation requires caregivers to play coach close attention to the cues their kids are sending and the right amount of support. Right? And in the old days, you would dismiss stuff like going away, putting the child in timeout, yelling or threatening, or rescuing, like moving in, making sure the child's not frustrated. Those aren't co-regulation, right? And so with co-regulating, you're holding the place for your kid's emotions, using that voice. You can even hear it in my voice, even as I talk about co-regulation. I'm using that soft, warm voice, right? And that co-regulation that I'm talking about is again helps model and grow a child's capacity for self-regulation. So again, my voice, movement, affect, gestures, the tone that we use, parents and primary givers can help infants and young children understand that they're felt with or attuned to, right? Just by that, again, so much of it's nonverbal, but again, with our voices, we soften our voices, it's gentle. We help babies become calmer and regulate themselves at times in distress, like when there's big feelings. And babies and young children start to internalize these conceptual strategies for self-regulation. This is how they build it, right? So I like this example. Our ABCs are actually really nice, right? So let's think about that. So the first thing you're doing as a parent is you're tuning. I'm reading what's going on with my child. I'm reading what's going on with my child. Then also first to reflect with yourself, right? Like, where am I with this? Make sure I'm calm. And then you calm and regulate your child by just, again, the voice and all those pieces. And you describe it and you help them repair it. And then you explore options, that curve again, right? It's going to have to be different with the different ages, right? So with babies, you kind of do it all. With toddlers, you're a little bit more actively doing it. As kids get older, then you start working on it. And I'll give you a really nice example of that as we go. So again, as we think about parents, they need to understand and discriminate their own emotions. They need to identify and see if the thoughts underlying a negative state is true. Like if you think, oh, my child is doing this to me, that's going to change things if you think, oh, my child is having a hard time right now, right? And you have to ask yourself, what's happening for me now? Now, this way of being reflective and introspective and having self-awareness, the goal isn't to be right, but it's just to explore what's the meaning, what's the basis of that going on in the internal world, right? Remember, I was talking about the words and the stories that you're telling, your behaviors and actions. This is again where parenting can become a very positive way for us to grow as human beings. I don't know of a parent who hasn't grown as a person because of parenting. So again, helping parents understand, get some insight and empathy with their child's behavior. Like, what does the behavior mean? What are they trying to What are they trying to express? What's underneath it? Is there a fear, a belief, or an experience? What emotion is at play? What's the underlying need? What's the story telling us, right? Now, I say that for parents to look at kids, but we can look at ourselves, right? And ask these same questions. And as parents, this is a great opportunity for us to become more reflective. Instead of being reactive, we become more responsive, right? So I'm teaching this stuff all the time. So what I want to teach parents is this, right? Your relationship with your child is how they build resiliency. We talk about resiliency as if it's some quantity like you're born with, like temperament. No, no, it's built through skill. And what's happening is you use your relationship to help your child or coworker regulate. So you're co-regulating, right? And in that time period, when they're calm, then you start reflecting on, hey, what happened? And then you help them reframe it. The more times we do this, the more experience we have on this, the more resiliency we build. Right. So I like I like using the same letter. So the simpler language that I use when I'm talking with families, because I think it's more useful, I say, hey, the first thing you have to do is calm the situation down. And then once things are calm, consider what happened or what caused it, and then create a new way of seeing the situation. Instead of it being a crisis, how do we work through it the next time? Right? So calm, consider, and create a new way. Regulate, reflect, and reframe, right? These are just little words that help processes that you do intuitively become more of a habit that becomes the habit you use. So again, I'm coming back to our map. And in that map, we see these pieces. And let's go into a story about a big meltdown with Sammy. So Sammy's a 4-year-old. He screams, he's hanging on to his mom while still pushing her away. And when Sammy's upset, he wants to be close, but he doesn't want to be held. His mom's learned. Really great mom. His mom moves away a bit and then suggests a calming strategy, counting and blowing out a candle, and told him, I'm here for you, right? Sitting on his step nearby. He continues to cry a little bit longer, then he starts to count, and his voice gradually gets calmer. And as he counts, and then when he gets to 30, he raises his finger and blows out the candle. And the mom says, are you ready for a hug? He climbs into her lap and fell into her, right? So that's again going back to that curve. You see where she's paying attention to where he is, responding appropriately. Now, what goes a step further is making sense, coherent narrative. So we use language to organize and make sense of our internal and external world by weaving together our thoughts, sensations, and emotions and actions. It's a way to explain behavior, emotional meaning. It's causally linked. It's a means of education, understanding, and change. And it provides the brain with a way of integrating information from other places. And it's a connection of the past and the present. And, so again, looking at this, we see how important this is. I actually go so far as to say this is the sacred work of parenting. And, again, that's the piece. So let's go back to Sammy and say, Sammy's mom kind of looks and says, okay, let's go through it. Sammy, do you remember what got you so upset? Once he's calm, I wonder if this made you upset. You did such a good job calming down. Do you remember what made you feel better? So helping him understand he has an ability to do this. It felt good to me that you hugged me when you felt better. Now, she doesn't have to do all of these. These are just possibilities. And letting him know I'll always try to help you when things get hard for you, right? So knowing that I'm there for you, right? So you can see how important it is if we can teach parents these techniques, right? So again, I'm just going to stop for a second here, take a breath, kind of let you see that whole picture again and kind of think about this whole thing. We've gone through that idea that, when we're upset, we need to first regulate ourselves, kind of get our emotions under a little bit of a calm, right? So again, thinking about the car, we need to kind of hit the brakes a little bit. We also need to see that when our children are at that state, they just need to know that they're safe and that they're calm. There's some kids that have these very prolonged times of being disrupted, right? And very reactive kids. And I've met these parents that are just amazing that they can wait it out because they know that's how their child is. They're there, they're comforting, they don't elevate the child. And these kids are highly reactive children, and these parents are so patient. And it's a learned skill, right? So, again, when you start thinking about these things, it's just amazing how well children will do when parents are given the support and skills. So, one of the things that we do a lot of with parents is trying to explain the power of play, right? So, think about play, right? Play promotes joyful learning that fosters self regulation, language, cognitive, and social skills, right? Play is essential for all children. There's lifelong benefits. Free play, which is unstructured play, is really important. It's also really important as kids get older that kids play with kids. They start learning how to make rules themselves, how to, work as a group. One of the most important things that we can help kids learn is how to collaborate. Right? We're living in a different time where it used to be all about information, but now it's about that ability to collaborate. So they need to play without rules. And so there's free play. I should actually have child-directed play as its own piece, right? Child-directed play is as a parent, a lot of times parents want to tell kids what to do, and that more structured play piece. And there's a role for structured play, particularly when it comes to sports and team things about learning rules and being part of the group, are really important to have that structured play. But again, that play when the parents really have that opportunity to follow their child's interest and explore with them and explore imagination. And it's really great. Now, that's kind of the role of parents is to partner, but sometimes, like I said, it's important to not have parents there and for kids just to play and organize themselves and sort things out for themselves because those are really important skills that we don't do as much as when I was little. We'd go play kick the can outside. We were always with other kids, figuring out like the order. I was the youngest in the group, so I was often told what to do by the kids that were older. But I learned that was my place at that time, right? So this is all kind of interesting pieces. So again, just keep that in mind, that play is just really, really important. It really is the work of childhood. Now, before we leave play, I just want to throw this out there as adults, it's also important to play, right? So play is an activity that doesn't have an outcome, right? Like you're not like trying to get something out of it. You're just doing it for the sheer joy of it. Now, whether it's playing board games, whether it's whatever the case is play is actually good for adults too. It gets us out of our thinking, and in this time of craziness and chaos, I just really want to have you all think about play for yourselves as adults and how important that is for our own mental health and well-being. The other part is as kids get older, when you play with your kids, everybody's at the same level, right? So it gives them the opportunity to go in these different roles. I have friends that love doing puzzles. That's another way of playing. People who play chess, people play different things. There's good and bads to video games, and that's a whole other lecture. But again, you can see that playing is really just an important part of who we are as human beings. Now, it would be impossible for me to give one of these talks without talking about culture. Casey had mentioned I do talk about culture, and culture and childhood is really kind of the intersection of my career. It's just, I love this stuff, right? How is culture going to impact language and communication? Well, different cultures and different cultures within cultures, subcultures, communicate and use language differently, right? There are some societies that are far more verbal than others. When I lived in Boston, I always found that the people from Maine just used a lot less words, and it was just part of their culture. And they just had a different way of communicating. So again, you can see even in America, there's differences in our local cultures on how we communicate, what we communicate. Also, being Indian, I grew up with a family that had more of a sense of collectiveness and our community and society, where in America it's more individualism, right? So these are interesting things about like how we develop concepts are influenced by our culture. socialization and roles, right? Like gender roles and different things are influenced by culture. How we socialize is our emotional development. Remember I was saying about the family um, and how important the family environment is to the expression of language. When I was doing some of my research, there was a study in Thailand of families that were very controlling and not controlling about how they used language. It was under control and over control. Fascinating to think about that. Again, going back to child play and children developing identity, and then behavior and expectations. It changes again within cultures, between cultures. Our expectations can be very, very different. The other part, and some of the stuff that I teach, I call it the culture of one or the culture of you. You can find at CalTrins. What's the heart of that is the idea that each of us are individuals. So it's the same with families. Families are all individual. We can't just say one family is, represents all kinds of things. Because again, our we have human universals, we have cultural experiences and individual experiences, and where they intersect really are part of our identity. So again, as we're thinking about development, we need to be so mindful of the cultural considerations. One of the other things we need to talk about is mental health, right? So, we're doing a lot of postpartum depression screening, and we talk about postpartum in the 4 to 6 weeks, and we know it affects attachment and it creates delays in developments. There's increased health illnesses and injuries in children, and later mental health and drug abuse when moms have postpartum depression. Postpartum depression is very treatable. It reverses the developmental delays, and as many as 1 in 8 mothers will have it, and up to 4% of fathers. Now, not on this slide, but from my perspective, we need to expand that. And we need to expand it, not just thinking about this window of postpartum. And before we go to the next part, there is postpartum depression, but there's also postpartum psychosis for a very small number of parents. And that's where we hear these horrible stories. But again, we want to be able to support moms in that postpartum period. But let's expand this and really talk about parent mental health, right? So a recent report studies as many as 1 in 14 children had a parent who reports poor mental health. And children are more likely to have poor general health and mental health and emotional health related to the adverse childhood experiences. And I'll talk about that briefly in a minute. Um, but again, we're seeing that the disorders are anxiety, depression, followed by PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. So let me just stop for a second and have you consider, what does that look like? What does that look like for a child's development if a mother or father is depressed outside of that postpartum time? It's the same as when we study postpartum depression. Those early windows, those early periods are really important, right? So again, this is this time period that we really want to be paying attention to parents' mental health across the board. And it's interesting with anxiety. We're going to talk about stressors that families are facing right now. But let's stop for a second and consider the amount of anxiety that's everywhere right now with the degree of uncertainty. And let's think about how does that affect our children? We want safe, stable, cert, nurturing relationships. We want routines and safety for kids. But if parents aren't feeling safe, that's going to impact kids. So again, we need to, as we think about child development, think about parent mental health as much as we do, as much as we're thinking about sorry, thinking about child development. They're very intertwined. Okay. So I'm going to stop for a moment. Again, I covered a lot. I want to just see if there are any questions. Casey, just call you back and
Yeah, let me check and see. We haven't had any pop up in the chat. And then we don't have any currently in the Q&A pod either.
okay. So let me okay, so let me jump to the next piece. Okay.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned, framing this issue. So let's kind of stop for a second. So we discovered a lot about child development. We talked about surveillance. We talked about screening. We talked about getting kids treated. We talked about what services are out there. We talked about what to look for. Okay, lot to cover. So I do want you, as we're getting ready to move into a Q&A period in a little bit, um, probably about 10, 20 minutes. Because one of the things I always try to get so much information that don't always set up time for conversation. But as we're thinking about all this in child development, right? Like, in the old days, I would teach this and it would just, here's the information. And back in the old days, it was, here are the milestones. And we'd have to like try to memorize them. Now we have all the information at our fingertips. And so I just talked about mental health, but let's talk about these other stressors, right? What has changed in parenting, right? So let's start with social media, okay? With social media, here are some of the issues that I'm trying to address and deal with. When you go out now, you'll see parents on their phones and their kids reaching for them and trying to get their attention, right? So one of the negative effects of social media is it's incredibly addictive. They have made it very addictive. They've studied all of the neuroscience that I studied, and instead of using it for good like I do, they've used it to get money and to make money off of you. So it really is important when we see parents on their phones to understand it is not an individual issue, it is a societal issue. And I would love to be able to keep talking to parents about the idea of give your kids that attention. Because when we give our kids that attention and we soothe the child or we connect with the child, it creates joy within us and not what we get out of our phones. So, okay, so one issue with social media is parent attention. The other part is screen time for children. I see babies with phones in front of them. I see little ones with that. Now, people tell me, oh, but Miss Rachel taught my kid this and that. Well, but Miss Rachel's two-dimensional. She's not three-dimensional. She's not a human being. Babies respond to faces. They love faces. They love the interaction, right? So really helping us kind of all break the addiction to social media, to all this technology. Now, social media itself is one piece, but now we have artificial intelligence and we just have an information overload. And again, in my world, everything is about connection. And so the whole piece that I want you to really be thinking about is that level of connection. And another thing that happens is I want to put this piece of scrolling into context. Early on the last slide, I mentioned how anxious we all are because there's so much information. I know even for myself, I find myself scrolling when I'm not paying attention. And I have to stop myself and I have to ask myself, am I scrolling because I need the information or am I scrolling to distract myself? So think about this. Our parents have this new technology that's snuck into their lives that's highly addictive, that takes their attention away from their children, right? And again, I'm not saying this in a judgmental way. I'm saying this in the consider the impact that it has for child development. Some of these things that are so important, right? So society's always changing. We sometimes take a long time to adapt to those changes. So again, before we move to artificial intelligence, parents' attention is being consumed by social media. How do we get that attention back? Parents are anxious and their attention is consumed by social media because that's a way to soothe their anxiety. Right? Um, so that's one critical piece. The other part is artificial intelligence. So with artificial intelligence and social media, you're now being bombarded with information. Oh, before I leave social media, I'm sorry, I just have to say this. I keep emphasizing this point that the links that I give you and the things that are here are high quality information. I just spent some time with my cousin who had a newborn who's about 3 months now. And she says, well, I get most of my information from social media. And, my heart hurt because I was like, what resources is she using? So I sent her some resources. I said, hey, just by the way, these are the resources that are higher quality. But that worries me because there's people giving advice that what their incentive is can I make money off of you? My incentive is I'd like to help you. So, okay, so that's social media. Probably should have had its own slide. Next time it'll have its own slide. My concern with artificial intelligence is just the like how good they can make it look, how much information bombards us, right? When that information bombards us, our thoughts get overwhelmed and we get disconnected from our emotions and our sensations, right? Our emotions start driving it. Now, this was the point that I was making earlier about misinformation. Between social media and AI, what is the quality of the information that we're giving, right? We just need high quality information. And when everything's moving this fast, and we'll talk about some other stressors, I understand why parents are looking for something quick, right? The other issue that we're facing as a society is social isolation. The Surgeon General the previous Surgeon General wrote a whole thing about social isolation and how it's impacting us. This goes back for many years that we as a society are becoming more individualized and separated, and that social isolation can really impact parents. And when you start feeling isolated, it does start creating some mental health issues, right? So, again, trying to find ways for families to connect with one another, to see others is really helpful. We talked about mental health on a previous slide. Now I'm going to run this list on the other side that I think are really important. One of the things that's really hard for me is when a parent says to me, I worry about having my child go to our childcare center because I worry about school shootings. When my kids were little and earlier in my practice, I had never heard such a question. The idea that someone would go in and shoot up a childcare or a daycare just was not believable, right? But this is unfortunately the reality that we live in. And I have mixed feelings about active shooter drills. At what age does a child understand that the active shooter drill is for an event that's very highly unlikely? Um, if you're an 8-year-old and you have an active shooter drill, but then you come home and you hear about school shooting, as children, we're kind of focused on our own little world, and we think, well, can that happen to me, right? So that's really a big challenge that our families are facing, and I don't have any great solution for it. But I think again, it's this whole idea of understanding what's going on. The other part is a lot of the little ones who were born during COVID were at home, had less social interaction, and we're seeing those kids in kindergarten and early elementary school, and they really missed opportunities, those critical windows for peer interactions with other adults. So there's a lot that happened in that time period that's created stress, and we haven't really addressed it as a society. Um, One that can be sensitive for some people is some of the racial reckoning. I've been involved with looking at race and ethnicity for close to 25, 30 years. It has been always there. It's just been more, uh, more seen and more understood. And I'm just going to stop for a second to say, think about the things that we understand about the impact of race and discrimination. If you are somebody from an ethnic minority group and you've experienced discrimination and you even are bold enough to go to a therapist, the therapist has to be skilled enough to be able to have the conversation about you, about what discrimination is impacting your mental health. And our mental health system is still largely um, Caucasian providers. We're training more and more folks from different communities. But again, if you're of a different background, how do we have these conversations and how do we heal some of this? We can even think about it as rupture and repair at the society level, right? So issues around race and ethnicity are front and center. There was progress. Now there's some backlash. This is how it always goes. But again, we need to be looking at that. What else is impacting families' stress, right? The economic stress. Right now, inflation, cost of living in San Diego has always been high. We now have inflation. We now have a war that is impacting our gas prices. And also our political divide has grown. So again, I want you to be thinking about child development in the context of families. So if we go back to one of my earlier slides, when we looked at there's the child and the family in the middle, and then the society around them and the country around them, right? We really need to be thinking about what are ways that we can respond. Um, I have the widening political gap, but there's also a widening gap economically. There's people that are really wealthy and there's people that are really poor, and our middle class has become smaller, and it's harder for our middle class to maintain a life, particularly in a place that's high cost like San Diego and California. Parts of California are very expensive. So I want to leave this slide with, if I could do a billboard, this would be my billboard. All families experience stress and all families need and deserve support. So again, we need to be thinking about how do we change the values and understand that we're all connected to one another and that we're all here together. So uh, my next slide's part of my prescription, right, is policy change, economic supports, childcare. As I mentioned earlier, I want to see universal childcare 0 to 8. What happens when you have childcare 0 to 8? A couple things that are really important. The important part is women finally get a real choice because women are still doing the majority of child caring and child rearing. Women now have a choice of being able to work. The other part is when they work, when you have universal child care, it's a little bit more of an investment as a society. That allows you, and again, I want it to be high quality so that you're not worried, because you heard the example that I gave you of the mom who was going to pick up her child. And, this is the important part. Okay, so that's one aspect. The other aspect is, when we talk about choice, I think there's another important piece we need to make about choice for again, parents, largely women. I think we need to say that if you choose to be at home with your child for the first couple years of their life, that is work. It's work, and if that's what you want to do, you should be paid for it. So that's my prescription for that piece. All right. The other policy change that I really would love to see is the idea of economic supports. How do we truly support economically families, right? During COVID, we had the earned income tax credit that was changed from instead of the end of the year to monthly. Um, there have been a lot of studies around basic income. I am here to tell you, and I'm sure many of you who are on this call are in the same way of thinking about it. When they study what happens when you give parents money for basic needs, guess what happens? That's what they use it for. They use it for basic needs. And all the study shows that it really helps in a variety of ways, including social mobility. Um, Families are often just a little bit away from being able to take that next step in their lives. Okay. So that's my policy change uh, panel or block. Obviously, you can hear that I keep talking about skill building, right? And the skill building is some of this educational content, right? Is getting this into families' hands in small, digestible, usable ways. With technology, maybe that's the way that we can use it for good, right? Same with artificial intelligence. We can use it for good. Can I get parents the right information at the right time for them to have an impact? So education, whether it's old fashioned, like with me talking, workshops with parents, skill building, however that is, it's really important. Again, you've heard us both talk about strengthening families and building parent resilience, right? So let's work on building resilience and getting parents concrete supports in times of needs, right? So think about what I had mentioned earlier about building resiliency. Resiliency isn't some magic quality you have or you don't have. Resiliency is really about building that through relationships. At a certain point, then you can start doing some of that stuff for yourself. I often have to take a break and do that same process of regulating myself, reflecting, and then reframing what happened. I can do that for myself now. That whole idea, I said it that way. The other way to say it is There's times I have to calm myself down, consider what was going on, and create a new way forward, right? I can do that now, but I had help building that skill. So again, I really would love for all of you to go to the parent resiliency workshops that CalTrin puts on. It's just another really great and important piece. Support, again, protective factors, mentioned them earlier. You can see how important they are. I want to talk about this last one a little bit more and share a few stories with you. Um, this aspect of care coordination and case management, I've always known our systems are complicated. I share with you very openly that I myself have a little bit of a challenge when it comes to working through some of these systems. It takes a lot of persistence. It takes a lot of pushing to get things out of the healthcare system, for example, right? So again, we didn't talk about it a lot, but there was a study called the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It was done here in San Diego by a gentleman named Vincent Folletti, and it just showed that the more adversity we had in our childhood, it impacted our health-seeking behaviors as well as our health outcomes. Um, Now, it was a really good study in that it brings the attention to what our early childhood looks like. And again, it's important because there are things that we can do to counterbalance that. I'm going to talk about hope in a moment. But what I really want you to think about is our families need those supports to be able to build up, and we want to build skills. So in my program, we had a family that came in, a lot of challenges. The families had a lot of adversity, it comes from a group that's been marginalized and traumatized. And they came in, and our staff noticed that the aunt of this little boy, who now was the caregiver, was out of sync. And so the case manager honed in on the family, and she got to know the family. And we were doing a case conference talking about the family, and she said, "Oh, I know this family." And what was beautiful about the way that she said it was she said, "I know this family in the way that I knew the family felt that she knew them." Now, this care coordinator, case manager, not only did she do a great job of connecting the family, making sure the family got through our system, made sure our family used the services, was engaged, their questions were answered. When things got in the way and the family couldn't come in, she took another step where she went to the actual provider whose session was being missed and explained what was going on for the family. And I like had a light bulb moment. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is such an amazing thing because when I'm busy and I'm seeing patients and a patient doesn't show up, I know I shouldn't take it personally, but I do. I'm a human being. I take it personally. But when someone comes in and says, "Hey, they couldn't make it because their car broke down and they tried to get transportation three other ways and they couldn't make it," I, I'm more understanding, right? So she just did a beautiful job. So this care coordination navigating is really important, not only for the healthcare system, our social service system, our education system. The education system for parents that haven't been through it is very complicated, just like our health system. So again, this whole idea of like how do we support families in a larger, more meaningful way? All right, so those are my areas that if I was ever running for office, I would run for. I think I can do more good by talking with folks. So I want you guys to think about what would our community look like if we teach parents and caregivers how to understand their child's inner world. We teach adults to understand and manage their emotions, teach parents how to co-regulate their child, and encourage play for everybody. So think about those things, right? So again, I want to come back to this piece of the inner world, and I actually want to stop here again to see if there are any questions, but I actually want to hear what you think of this. Like, is this slide helpful to you? So I want to slow down for a minute so that we have an opportunity to take a look at that. I have to check how many more slides I have. Oh, just two more slides. Okay. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and get people's feedback on that.
I know that you would have my vote. I just want to say that. But we have one question in the Q&A pod. Is it possible to go over more about infants not having thoughts? They just have emotions, thus needing to be um, regulated or co-regulated.
Oh, shoot. It makes me think. So, okay, just a little disclosure. I do talks a lot. One of the talks that I have is this same picture with two, right? So it's the inner world of two people to kind of really talk about the fact that every interaction we have is one bubble to another bubble, and there's a lot of nonverbal communication, right? I do this same picture with this picture of the adult, and then with the child, I have the thought part taken out, and that the world of a child of a baby is sensation and emotion. Okay, stop for a second. Okay, look, create a picture of a baby in your mind. Okay, what does a baby do? Baby wakes up, baby eats, baby maybe plays a little with you, baby poops, baby sleeps, baby eats, baby poops, baby plays, right? That's the world of a baby. All right. One of the fun parts is when you watch babies carefully, they're trying to engage you all the time. It's amazing. They know innately they need you to survive, right? The other part they're really good at is making you feel really, really important because you have to take care of them, right? It's always joke that that's what babies have a special power. Now, not related to this question, but an interesting bit of trivia that always makes me go, how did they study this? Um, how many of you love the smell of babies, the new baby smell, right? Probably a lot of hands going up, right? Guess what? That smell, the new baby smell that we're addicted to, it actually suppresses the emotion of disgust. Your baby poops, you clean it up. Your baby throws up on you or spits up on you, you clean it up. And you're always comforting your baby when that happens. Now, if an adult did that, you wouldn't do that, right? Like if an adult spits up on you, you're going to get upset, right? So totally fascinating. So again, I want you to just consider the baby's world because thoughts haven't developed, because the brain hasn't developed that part of the brain, means that their entire world, pre-verbal world, is purely emotions and sensations. Therefore, the way that we co-regulate them is through emotions and sensations. Now, we might be using words. The words are helping their brain develop, but those words are helping us convey emotion, right? And what is the emotion you're conveying to a child? It's okay. I'm calm because I'm calm and I'm big. You're calm. You cried because you needed food. I gave you food. Your need was met. So you start seeing how this attachment and attunement, this dance between parent and child is so powerful. You will generally see moms start breastfeeding on the left side. Guess what happens? The baby's at the mom's heart. The mom is looking at the baby, and there's this resonance that's happening, right? So as kids are getting more sophisticated, parents' response gets more sophisticated. There's a time period where so many parents say to me, I can't wait till they talk. And then by about four, they're like, I can't wait till they stop talking because they're talking so much now, right? But we're growing as parents in terms of being able to absorb that. So just think about that. You are as a as the adult caregiver of a baby, you are completely the baby is completely dependent on you for survival, right? And they're completely doing that, surviving on sensations and emotions, which happen in the lower parts of the brain, right? So now you see how those patterns go on for a lifetime. Okay. So I'm going to share a personal story with you all. I was 18 months old when my parents came from India. I lived with my grandparents and they had help. In India, there's a lot of help. So my brother had a nanny, I had a nanny. That's four of the people taking care of me and my parents, who were both working, right? I came to America with my parents. I didn't bring those four caregivers with us. right? I came to this country before I had words. I spent my whole life being curious about this. I'm here today teaching you all about this. I think that's pretty amazing, right? Like I teach about attachment and attunement. And my mom says, you teach about attachment and attunement. I feel bad. And I'm like, why do you feel bad? I'm close to both you and before my dad passed away, I was close to both of you. We had a great relationship. Why do you feel bad? And she's like, well, I took you away from these caregivers. I said, Mom, look, it all worked out. I'm actually helping people with this, and I'm sharing these stories and I'm sharing this stuff. And one of the things that we can do as adults is look back at what didn't happen in our childhood and make those changes ourselves, right? So I have experiences now as an adult that help me. Also, those experiences inform me. I mean, that's why I talk about this stuff all the time. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? I'm not going to sit there and feel sorry for myself. I'm going to think, wow, I'm so glad I got to study this stuff and I get to teach this stuff. You all are listening to this stuff. It's great. So again, it's so important. So the takeaway point is this is magical. This is amazing. Babies are dependent. It's so formative to our lives. You know, there's some philosophers that say what happens to us in the first year of our lives, we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out because we need to add the words and the stories to, right? Okay. That's one perspective. But what I want you to know, what I want you to really think about is what does our world look like when every time a baby is born, the family is supported, right? In America, it's very common for a mother to go home, single mother to go home and have another child and have nobody there to help her take care of these two children, including a newborn, right? She's on her own. Actually, I live in San Diego. Military moms are doing this all the time. I mean, it's crazy, right? We need to swoop in as a society if the family's open to it and say, hey, we got 3 to 4 people that are here to support you. Your job is to be with your baby, bond with your baby, and most importantly, you as a mother are experiencing the fourth trimester. You just went through the most amazing, but also most physically challenging change that a human body goes through, giving birth. Your physical, emotional, and mental health and your connection to your child should be our society's priority from now on. In civilized societies, there's at least 3 to 5 adults when this happens. Now, those civilized societies are villages in third world countries, and we think they're primitive. Hmm. Who's primitive, right? I think we're primitive, right? I think we should change it. We're the richest country that's ever existed in the world, and we can't wrap around every family when their baby's born. And I do it from the idea that I believe in how do we how do we help people live to their fullest potential? What would that look like, right? Like what would that look like? Like that's my dream, right? And I invite you all to join in with me in the dream of a place where kids and babies are put first because then that makes our society the strongest, right? I don't believe more aircraft carriers and more drones and more of those things make us safer. I think it makes us less safe, right? I think the more love we have in the world, the more safe we are, right? We start understanding not only do other people matter, but plants, animals, they matter. We can't take up all the resources. We need to share. Isn't that the biggest lesson that we try to teach little ones? Share nicely. Maybe we all need to learn that a little bit, right? So I know there's another question. So let's go with another question
Okay.
because I only have 2 more slides after this.
Now everyone's understanding why we love Dr. Pradeep so much, right? So, one of the questions is, are there any resources you can recommend for working with preteen girls with ADHD and learning how to regulate their emotions?
All right, funny answer first. My funny answer first is I don't think there's nothing I can do past 5. Once you get to 5, you're on your own. I'm kidding. My programs and my work has been mainly at that younger age. Couple of resources. There is a child psychiatrist up in LA, Tina Payne Bryson. She works with Dan Siegel. She has a lot of really beautiful books, very thoughtful books um, about, the power of showing up. Now, you're talking about a specific set of girls that have ADHD. Now, a couple things I want to explore with that. So I'm not going to give you, I mean, I will work with the CalTrins team to see if I can find some other resources on this. It may not make it in 2 days, but we still have the opportunity to follow up in the future or individually. We're happy to do that. Here's what I want to share with you about ADHD in girls. Okay, a couple things to really be a lot of things to think about. Generally, ADHD in girls, there's a higher frequency of inattention rather than the hyperactivity. So it's really important to tease it out. Is it the hyperactivity? Is it the inattention? Or is it both? Okay, that's one. Number two, there's a huge explosion of adults that believe they've got ADHD. And I said, I don't even want to talk to you until you put your damn phone away for, excuse my language, put your phone away for 2 weeks to a month, and then you can talk to me about, do you have ADHD? Is that perception of ADHD part of the teen girl piece where, I don't know if y'all know this, but teen girls are far more impacted by social media and sense of self-worth than boys are. And I think part of it is put down the phone first and let's talk from there. Now, that said, you can build those skills. And so I'm glad you asked that question, in that ADHD impacts those executive function skills. And there's lots of books out there about that. I can't pull them off the top of my head like I did with Tina Payne Bryson um, and Dan Siegel. Because those are folks that I know work the whole age span. But we can definitely get you some resources on that. I'm happy to do that. But again, I think the biggest thing is coming back to the parents, talking to the parents, talking to the teenager, and kind of helping them navigate, what do you value? What do you want first, right? And then work back to say that, given that you might have some ADHD, let's take a look at what would help you with that. Now, I'm looking at our time and I feel like I can get away with this with our time. I'm going to share with you a concept around ADHD that may not be the kind of most mainstream. There was an article in the Atlantic Monthly years and years ago called Orchid Children. And the idea was some children are like orchids. Orchids bloom beautifully in the right environment. And some kids are like weeds. Interesting premise, great book, or great article. But one of the things they talked about was, what is the adaptive effect of ADHD? So if you have, let's just kind of use this as an experiment to think. If you had one gene that give you ADHD traits, you would start looking around a little bit more than everybody else. Well, if we are a tribe or a herd of human beings, you want one person that's looking for danger, right? To make sure the rest of us are safe. Now, if that person that's scanning for danger now has two genes, they're scanning a little bit more. Okay. They have three, they're scanning even more. But when you start getting to 4 doses of that gene, then you're having a hard time getting through life. If you have 5 or 6, then you're the adult that drives and takes a wrong turn somewhere and stops at a car dealership and buys a new car because you're so impulsive. Now, some of those folks need medication. A lot of those folks need help with managing their behaviors, right? So that's kind of the adapting to the world that exists thinking. But the other part to do is, again, flip the idea into thinking about this idea that the person scanning is going to have a different way of doing things. So those of us that have things that look like ADHD may be the person that's a little bit more creative that helps the whole group survive. So that's just another piece, that there may be an adaptive advantage of it. And you may have a hard time fitting in with society, but you may be one of the most creative people in the group, right? So those are just some ideas to explore. ADHD is fascinating because, again, it is a culturally constructed diagnosis. And actually, my work in my fellowship was on um, cultural interpretations of ADHD. So really, really fascinating for me. I see we have one more question in the Q&A, but I want to just do my next slide, and then we'll jump to that. Okay. My next slide, Casey, believe it or not, this is not a plant for CalTrin, but it is inadvertently, it is. So I'm saying this all with a little bit of a sense of humor about this. I have been very involved with this work called health health outcomes from positive experiences, right? So I've been involved with this work for quite a while. I mentioned very briefly about the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. A colleague of mine, Bob Sege, and others asked the question. I know a lot of people who have had really bad childhoods who are amazing people now. What's the difference? And it turns out positive experiences. So just like negative experiences can negatively impact us, positive experiences can impact us. And just like the ACEs, where the more ACEs you had, the more problems you had, with the positive experiences, the more positive experiences, the more resiliency you have. So you see how the conversation about resiliency comes back. And I'm going to, if you're interested in childhood trauma and understanding the dynamics with that, I would love to recommend to you the work of friend and colleague Bruce Perry. Bruce Perry, PhD, MD, he got his PhD first. Now, he's actually very familiar because he wrote a book called What Happened to You, which is one of the best general books around the impacts of childhood trauma, with this woman named Oprah. Obviously, it was a bestseller. Now, more importantly than it was a bestseller, it is really good. And I actually got it as an Audible book, and it's Bruce Perry, this colleague of mine, and Oprah talking, going back and forth. So it's really remarkable, very, very helpful. Why do I bring up Bruce Perry? Bruce Perry, one of the single most preeminent researchers in childhood trauma, in every lecture that I've heard him give, and it's well over 20, he says, please remember, it's not the trauma, it's who is there to help you make sense of it that matters. Now, do you see why that curve that I showed you about emotional regulation and making meaning when we're calm is the sacred work of parenting? It's the sacred work of therapy as well, right? When there's things that happened earlier in our lives that we didn't make sense of, we can make sense of it now. And hope, as my colleague talks about, is making sure that we have good relationships, safe environments, opportunities for engagement, and opportunities for emotional growth. Now, I love that, but a more generic version of hope is the idea that my future can be better than my today, right? So resiliency will get you back to where you were. Hope will move you forward, right?
I could get on my soapbox about hope and protective factors here. Um,
Please
and
do.
yeah, and Hope 101, we just provided this training. I put the link in the chat for anybody who's wanting to go back and review that. And so, when talking about hope, it's really hard not to also include the protective factors
Mhm.
because they do bridge a huge gap and they are so similar in ways that the protective factors really are also a foundation of hope and instilling hope in our community. And so I love what you said that, the trauma that people are experiencing is terrible, obviously, but also it's so important to see who's around you during those times. And I highly encourage you to check out Hope. It's as Dr. Pradeep said, talks about the ACEs, talks about PCEs and how gives a really good example. I have a video in there that I show that's about your brain's resilience, an adolescent brain, and it's showing the process of how an adolescent brain functions when it's experienced adverse childhood experiences. But also what happens when they experience positive childhood experiences. And scientifically, it's even a kiddo who has not experienced ACEs or PCEs is actually statistically worse in a worst case scenario if they've not experienced any positive childhood
Mhm.
experiences as well. So it's just an interesting statistic. I encourage you guys to check it out. It's a wonderful video to show to parents and caregivers and even teenagers for them to understand that there is a biology behind this, but there is hope for me and that my future right now, or that my current situation does not have to be my future, just as Dr. Pradeep said. And so I will go ahead and read that last question. It's more of a comment in the Q&A, but they said that the inner world reminds me of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Great. I'll come back to make a comment about that in a moment, but I want to comment on your comment because I want to build on what you said. So, I mentioned that Bob's actually Segi is actually a very good friend of mine, and the way that he describes hope is he says hope is the little sister to the protective factors. He
Mhm.
literally, what Casey said, he literally feels that his work is building on the protective factors. It's like if you think about the ACEs, you think about strengthening families, and you think about hope, hope ties it together and helps us find a way forward with it,
Yeah.
right? So what you said was really important and really powerful, but also because of like knowing all these folks and having the context, it's really interesting to see that that work is interrelated and connected very deeply. Like the roots of these two things are woven together. So if you ever get the chance to look up aspen trees are beautiful, but they all share the same roots, and they're a whole forest of roots. And so, really, in many ways, all of this stuff is the aspen forest of this work. And so it's interconnected by its roots. So that just tells you how deeply connected we are. The other thing that I would love to do, and maybe Casey, this is one of my future CalTrins trainings. Um, I was supposedly an expert on childhood trauma, and I say supposedly because I think of myself as a student and I'm always learning. And Bruce and others are kind of the people that I think are the experts. But one of the things that I teach now is before we talk about trauma, let's talk about post traumatic growth. Trauma, in the context of a healing relationship or healing processes, actually can become the fuel for our growth, right? We can grow through joy, we can grow through trauma. The important part is building those skills. And for me, one of the doorways to healing is our relationships and being able to process our trauma. And again, not to relive it, but to actually turn it into the fuel for growth. So there's a whole field of study around post-traumatic growth coming out of the cancer literature. And it's really important for us to understand that we're here to grow. And that comment about it reminds me of cognitive behavioral theory. I would say cognitive behavioral theory reminds me of Buddhist thought. That was that's like 3,000 years old, right? Meditation in yoga, Buddhist practices, um, practices from shamanistic cultures really takes a look at this universal that I shared with you. What I'm sharing with you is just humanly universal. You know it because it's what you do and who you are. What I'm trying to do is put some attention on it so that you can look at it and say, how does this work? Right? The idea that I look at my stories and the words that I use is been so helpful to me, right? So yes, cognitive behavioral therapy grows out of these pieces of that universal human truth, right? And I've met and interviewed and worked with shamans. They will share some of this stuff in their own way. I've met therapists that'll share it this way. I've met people in the personal development world that share it this way. The intersection on all of this stuff is how do we grow? How do we nurture ourselves to become better human beings? And just looking at the time, I want to give room for just a few questions and also the wrap up. So I just want to leave you with this. A child is born with the capacity to learn. All domains of development are important and they support each other. They're intertwined, right? The quality of a child's relationships with their caregivers nurtures this capacity. We need to encourage and support parents. I'm sure that came across. Um, Direct parents to reliable information. And I want to leave you with this in this time of great uncertainty. With secure attachment, quality emotional regulation, and a supportive environment, each generation can surpass the previous one in learning and development. The thing that we have developed as a society is skills that make us money. We need to shift that paradigm to we need to develop the skills to make us more caring for one another and to understand how interconnected we are with each other. This is my life's work. This is an aspect of what I do, right? And I want to give time because I know we have to do a few wrap up items for the talk, but I just want to thank you all because over 90 of you are here, 3 hours into a conversation that I hope will be an ongoing and ever growing conversation. And with that, Casey, I turn it back over to you.
Yes, yeah, thank you. So now everyone can see why we love Dr. Pradeep so much and why we use him and we love our trainings with him. And I wanted to make I saw it might be Leia. I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I hope that I am in the comments. Mentioning that you have a question but never felt that bringing it out loud was there was a good time for it, and that most people all went through, or most successful people all went through trauma. And unfortunately, one of the comments that I have for that is a large majority of our population has experienced one or more adverse childhood experience. Now, there are people, of course, out there who haven't, but it's something to keep in mind when we're thinking about our collective human being next to us, right? And so having that, or having said that, the person next to us, of course, we don't know what they've been through, but the likelihood of them also experiencing an adverse childhood experience is incredibly common. And not only that, but for the most successful people, sometimes we can see the research behind that is that positive childhood experiences that were implemented within their life also helped balance that scale, or balance the outcome of your adulthood and your mental health when it came to the trauma that you also experienced. So there is some scientific stuff behind that. I guarantee you, you'll love the Hope training that we just did. With that being said, thank you all so much for being here today and interacting and discussing in the chat. And then I wanted to let you know that we do have the 2-day survey that will be sent to your email. Of course, it will have the participant guide handout. We have the note-taking slides in there, the recording. I threw in some extra resources for you as well, some links for you to check out. So I just want to make sure I let you know that. And then with that being said, I
I,
believe that,
I
yep,
had two more, I had two more really quick things.
go ahead.
I looked at the chat. So I'm sorry. I talk, I get excited. Sometimes I go a little, in different directions. Going back to ADHD, I just want to make this point because somebody asked this question. So in ADHD, when you study ADHD, boys are more likely to be diagnosed with the hyperactivity side. Girls are more likely to be diagnosed with the inattention. The biology is the same, the way that it's expressed is different. Another way to think about that is we have behaviors that are called externalizing. So boys tend, again, it's not exclusive. You can have hyperactive girls as well. It's just there's a lot more hyperactive boys and little girls that are inattentive. Those little girls often in the classroom they're such good girls. They're just sitting there. They're not just sitting there, they're spaced out, right? So they're inattentive, they're missing things. So again, just an important little distinction. And then Casey, I just want to add to your lovely comments about people who have trauma. Somebody asked that question. To me, it's those people that had trauma, that had positive experiences, like you mentioned, that gave them the attachment relationship and the attunement that created the space for them to be able to heal. It's a doorway to healing our relationships, right? That's another thing that I'm working on. It's book 4. I've got 3 others I need to write before that. But what you asked is really important because when people have that trauma, they then use it as fuel for growth. You'll see people that like commit their lives to serving others. So that's the really good piece. You also see a lot of business leaders who had very traumatic childhoods who then haven't healed and they're horrible people to work for. There is when I look at Mark Zuckerberg, I think this man has no empathy. He obviously is all about making money. When I look at Elon Musk, I hear about his childhood, and he grew up with a very abusive father. And you can see that in his personality. So again, interestingly enough, unresolved, it looks one way, resolved, it looks a way. But I've met some of the most amazing, compassionate human beings who had the worst childhoods, who have used their childhoods as fuel for growth. So just wanted to add that.
Yep. Oh my gosh, so much good stuff. I could keep going. I could keep going and going and going, but I promise you can check out the Hope 101 training. We have Protective Factors series here at CalTrin that I facilitate. And just a personal note too, for myself, I'm welcoming my husband and I are welcoming our first
Yay.
baby here in July. And so this training, just as much as like me being my CalTrin training coordinator self, is also beneficial for me becoming a parent as well. So it makes me so helpful or hopeful, I guess. With that being said, we are going to go ahead and close out the training for today. Thank you all so much for being here. Make sure to check in with us. And for my first timers, I hope you loved today's training and we see you again in our future Caltrin trainings. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.